Hey guys, tonight we travel south, far south, past the familiar sands of Egypt and into a stretch of golden desert that breathes heat by day and cool silence by night. You stand at the edge of the Nile, that same river that has carried dreams, gossip, and papyrus scrolls for millennia. The moon glints across its black surface, and you can almost hear the creak of wooden boats carrying grain, incense, and whispers of distant queens. Welcome to ancient Nubia, a kingdom that thrived quietly, while empires to the north shouted about their greatness. This is a land where women didn't just advise kings, they were kings, or more precisely, queens of astonishing power. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere unexpected, maybe a tiny apartment in Hanoi or a cabin in Finland, drop your location and local time in the comments. It always amazes me how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe. Turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sand crunches under your feet as you step closer to the water's edge. The air smells faintly metallic, maybe from the minerals in the soil, maybe from the trace of gold dust still clinging to Nubia's memory. To your left, cliffs rise, like frozen waves, sheltering tombs carved with symbols that glow under moonlight. The carvings tell you that life here wasn't an afterthought of Egypt. It was its equal, sometimes even its rival. You notice how calm everything feels, though history insists this land was full of noise once. Smiths hammering iron in Meroe, traders shouting over prices in Napata, priests chanting under the sun. But now, it's just you and the whisper of wind that seems to carry the scent of time itself. Somewhere nearby, the ruins of temples still stand, their sandstone columns etched with the names of queens who ruled through charm, cunning, and an unflinching sense of style. The Nubians weren't a single people. They were a collection of cultures, farmers and nomads, herders and builders bound together by the rhythm of the Nile. Their world was smaller than Egypt's, perhaps, but their stories are just as glittering. They built pyramids too, hundreds of them, smaller but steeper, rising like teeth from the desert floor. When archaeologists first saw them, they thought they were Egyptian imitations. Turns out the Egyptians might have been the copycats in some ways. History loves irony. You wander along the riverbank, where reeds rustle like parchment and crocodiles blink lazily from the shallows. Ancient travelers described this land as both fierce and fertile. In some seasons, the river gave everything: fish, soil, trade. In others, it stole it all back with floods and famine. To survive, the Nubians learned rhythm: when to plant, when to trade, when to praise, and when to pray. Every act became a kind of diplomacy, with the river, with Egypt, with gods that never seemed to sit still. By the time the first pharaohs looked south, Nubia was already humming with its own life. Villages clustered along the river like beads on a necklace. People fished, smelted copper, and farmed millet. Children played near the water, shouting in languages that left no written trace. The first kings of Kerma, centuries before the famous queens, ruled from mud brick palaces surrounded by cattle pens and gardens. Their power wasn't born from conquest, but from control of trade, the lifeblood of antiquity. Gold, ebony, ivory, ostrich feathers, all flowed northward through Nubian hands. Egypt's temples gleamed because Nubia's miners sweated. At night, fires flickered along the riverbanks, and you can almost hear laughter, the kind that comes after a day of hard labor. Someone tells a story about a god who swallowed the moon. Someone else tunes a lyre carved from acacia wood. It's easy to forget that boring history is made of human voices, not just dusty names. Historians still argue whether Nubia's rise was sparked by trade alone or by cultural resistance, by people who refused to become Egypt's southern province. Either way, it worked. Around 1000 BCE, while Egypt stumbled through political hangovers, Nubia was building temples to Amun and forming armies of archers so skilled that Greek historians centuries later still whispered about their aim. They called Nubians the bow people, a name half fear, half respect. You look up at the stars mirrored in the river and realize that this kingdom thrived in the balance between desert and flood, power and grace, ambition and patience. That balance would soon give rise to something extraordinary, a line of queens who ruled not by accident, but by design. Before Egypt's Cleopatra ever fluttered her lashes at Rome, Nubia's Kandakes were negotiating, commanding, and yes, accessorizing their way through geopolitics. The air cools. Somewhere, a nightbird cries. The scent of burnt incense drifts from a forgotten shrine nearby, mingling with the smell of sand and silt. The wind carries fragments of words from ancient hymns, the kind sung not for glory but for peace after a long harvest. And you, modern, sleepless, curious, stand there, a guest at the threshold of history that refuses to stay buried. You imagine a caravan approaching from the west, camels loaded with salt, gold, and gossip. The traders will rest by the water, trading stories of faraway places. They'll talk about Egypt's chaos, about Rome's ambition, about a queen who might soon rise in the south. Her name hasn't yet been written on stone, but her legend already stirs in the sand. You can almost hear her laughter echoing in the distance, low and sure. The night thickens. The Nile glows faintly under the moon, a ribbon of silver threading through kingdoms long forgotten by maps but still alive in the memory of the desert. You breathe slowly, the kind of deep breath that carries the heat and dust of time itself. Somewhere beyond the dunes lies the heart of the story, the rise of women who bent empires with a smile and rebuilt nations between wars. But for now, you simply stand by the river, half awake, half asleep, listening to the heartbeat of a civilization that refused to fade quietly. The Nile still murmurs beside you as dawn breaks over the desert, the kind of slow, honey-colored sunrise that seems to stretch across centuries. You lift your gaze and see the two giants, Egypt to the north and Nubia to the south, staring each other down through the shimmer of heat. The river, winding and patient, has always been the stage for their rivalry and their romance. Egypt was the louder sibling. Pyramids, pharaohs, hieroglyphs shouting their glory across time. Nubia, in contrast, was the quiet genius, listening, learning, and building a power structure that would one day turn Egypt's own playbook upside down. The two weren't enemies so much as reluctant dance partners, bound by geography and greed. One couldn't thrive without the other, though both pretended they could. You watch the sunlight catch on distant temple walls, Egyptian hieroglyphs etched alongside Nubian symbols, proof that the two cultures were less us and them, and more a complicated situationship. Trade was their love language, gold and cattle for papyrus and perfume, ebony wood for copper tools. Each transaction carried layers of diplomacy. Each gift of incense or jewelry came with a side of political theater. Historians still argue whether Nubia absorbed Egyptian customs willingly or if it was a matter of cultural pressure. Either way, you can picture it clearly. Scribes copying hieroglyphs, priests learning new chants, queens watching Egyptian fashion trends roll in like the latest viral sound. Yet, in true Nubian style, they made it their own. Bolder colors, richer fabrics, taller crowns. Copy the outline, reinvent the essence. That was their secret. The first real mingling began during Egypt's Middle Kingdom, when pharaohs decided the gold mines in Nubia were too tempting to ignore. Expeditions crossed the border, armed with soldiers, architects, and an irritating sense of entitlement. They built forts along the Nile, massive mud brick monsters meant to secure trade routes and remind the Nubians who was in charge. You can almost hear the conversations, Egyptian overseers barking orders, Nubian traders pretending to nod while quietly hiking prices behind their backs. For a while, Egypt's control seemed absolute. But power, like river water, eventually flows back. As Egypt weakened, civil wars, famine, overambitious building projects, Nubia rose from the shadow. Around 1000 BCE, the balance shifted. The kingdom of Kush emerged, first centered in Napata, then later in Meroe. It wasn't a copycat kingdom. It was a remix. Egyptian gods sung in Nubian rhythm. You wander through Napata in your mind. The capital hums with life, merchants unloading ebony logs, scribes tallying goods on papyrus scrolls, priests consulting the god Amun beneath towering sandstone columns. A child runs past, clutching a small clay figure shaped like a lion. an early echo of strength. The scent of roasting grain mixes with the sweat of animals and the sweetness of date wine. This is what power smells like in the ancient world, a mix of labor and luxury, all baked under an unforgiving sun. At the royal court, a delicate balance plays out. The king, crowned in gold, is both divine and deeply human, his rule strengthened by ritual but threatened by rumor. Behind him stands the queen mother, quiet yet commanding, her jewelry gleaming like a second sun. The court poets praise him, but the people whisper that she holds the true power. You file that away, because soon those whispers will become history. Egypt, meanwhile, wasn't done meddling. Pharaohs came and went, each one convinced they could fix Nubia by conquering it again. The irony? Every conquest left behind more Egyptian culture that the Nubians bent to their own use. By the time Egypt realized it, the Kushite kings were not only fluent in Egyptian ritual, they were better at it. When Egypt collapsed into civil chaos around 750 BCE, the Nubians saw their chance. You imagine the march north, Kushite armies shimmering in bronze and linen, archers precise enough to split an arrow mid-air. They cross into Egypt, not as raiders but as restorers, claiming to bring back divine order. Soon they're ruling as pharaohs, the 25th dynasty, sometimes called the Black Pharaohs. Their reign stretched from the Nile Delta to the heart of Africa, a continental empire born from patience and adaptation. Yet the Nubians weren't just conquerors. They were caretakers of culture. They restored temples, revived old rituals, and reminded Egypt what elegance looked like. Under them, art flourished again. Carvings grew more expressive, color palettes richer, and queens stepped into prominence as co-rulers. You picture one such scene, a coronation on the banks of the Nile. Priests chant, drums throb, and incense curls into the dawn. The queen stands beside the king, her head held high beneath a crown shaped like a vulture's wings. The people kneel, chanting both their names. It's partnership, not patriarchy, a rare duet in a world of solo performances. Still, the alliance between Egypt and Nubia was never simple. Trade treaties doubled as marriage proposals. Royal visits included passive-aggressive gift exchanges. Oh, another gold bracelet? How original. And beneath the politeness, both sides watched for weakness. There's a small smile on your lips as you imagine it, the most ancient version of political gossip. Did you hear Pharaoh Taharka sent envoys south again? Yes, but Queen Amanirenas sent them back with an extra basket of onions and no answer. Petty? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Over time, the borders blurred. Egyptians living in the south married Nubians. Nubians studying in the north returned with Egyptian ideas wrapped in new logic. The Nile didn't divide, it connected. The two civilizations became mirrors, each reflecting and reshaping the other. Still, beneath this shared glitter, Nubia kept its own rhythm, slower, deeper, attuned to the desert's silence. They knew that empires shouting their greatness often burned out quickly. So they watched. They waited. And when the moment came, they acted with precision and grace. Historians today still debate whether Nubia's dominance of Egypt was a return to balance or just another imperial chapter. But what can't be denied is this. For a few shining centuries, the south led the north, and the world learned to pronounce names like Pie, Shabaka, and Amanirenas with respect. The wind picks up again. Sand moves across your feet like a soft tide. You can almost hear the ghosts of diplomats practicing flattery, generals sharpening bronze blades, and a queen adjusting her crown before walking into yet another council of men who think they're in charge. You smile, because soon they won't be. The river gleams brighter now. It's morning in ancient Nubia, and the queens are waking. The morning deepens into gold as you step into the bustle of daily life in Napata, the beating heart of ancient Nubia. The city hums with rhythm, the bleating of goats, the clang of hammers, the murmured prayers of traders kneeling toward the rising sun. The scent is a curious blend of fresh grain, hot iron, and the sharp sweetness of date syrup simmering in clay pots. You're not standing in some distant sterile ruin anymore. You're here, barefoot in the dust, watching how ordinary people made an extraordinary kingdom run. Napata isn't a city of marble or grand illusions. It's practical, built to breathe with the heat, to endure sandstorms, and to cradle its people close to the Nile. Streets twist like veins through clusters of adobe homes. each one painted with ochre and white designs that shimmer faintly under the morning light. A woman grinds millet beside her doorway, singing a tune that might be half lullaby, half gossip. A child chases a chicken through the alley. You notice that life here is slower, deliberate, more about survival and subtle beauty than conquest. Historians still argue whether Napata was designed with an Egyptian-style grid or developed organically like an African village. The archaeological evidence, broken pots, carved stelae, temple ruins, leans toward the latter. What's certain is that it thrived as a crossroads. Merchants from the Red Sea brought spices. Caravans from the Sahara carried salt and gold. And Egyptian priests came with scrolls, curious about Nubia's gods, who seemed strangely familiar, but more forgiving. You wander into the market square. It's noisy, but in a warm, melodic way, bartering that sounds like song. Women sit behind mats covered in beads, shells, and perfumes. A craftsman carves a small statue from ebony wood, his chisel strokes sharp and rhythmic. Somewhere nearby, someone's roasting barley cakes, and your stomach betrays you with a quiet growl. Gold dust sparkles on traders' arms like accidental jewelry. This is where the wealth came from, not from grand conquests, but from miners in the far southern hills, men and women who descended into dark tunnels with only oil lamps and courage. The Nubian word for gold once symbolized not just wealth, but life itself. You can almost imagine their hands, caked in earth, holding up a nugget that would later adorn a queen's headdress. The mines were backbreaking, yet they fueled everything: temples, diplomacy, even art. Egypt called Nubia Ta-Seti, the land of the bow. But they could just as easily have called it the land that made the jewelry budget possible. Without Nubian gold, many Egyptian gods might have had to go to work wearing nothing but sandstone. Farther down the market lane, a herder drives a line of long-horned cattle toward the river for water. They move slowly, bells clinking, kicking up fine dust that catches the sun in soft halos. Each animal is wealth, dowry, and dinner all in one. You can tell by the way people glance at the herd, a mix of admiration and hunger. As the day heats up, you find shade under a woven awning where scribes sit on low stools, copying records with reeds dipped in ink. Their scrolls list everything from grain taxes to ceremonial wine deliveries. You wonder what it must have felt like to document the queen's treasury, to hold numbers that represented not just goods but the pulse of a kingdom. One scribe, chewing thoughtfully on his reed pen, murmurs that they've just recorded an unusually high order of palm oil. Someone jokes that the queen must be planning a banquet or a bribe. Both are equally possible. The Nubians were masters of subtlety. Their society prized cleverness over brute strength. They negotiated first, fought later, and when they fought, they did so with grace. Archers who could shoot by sound, cavalry who moved like dancers. But in daily life, it was their patience that built empires. You feel it in the air here, in the unhurried pace of conversation. The way even a dispute over fish prices resolves with laughter and a shared jug of beer. Speaking of beer, Nubian brews were famous across the region, thicker, darker, and somehow both refreshing and filling. Archaeologists once found residue in ancient jars and concluded that the people of Meroe might have been tipsy for entire harvest seasons. You can picture it now, a fisherman, done with work, lounging by the water, sipping from a clay cup, complaining about taxes but still smiling because the Nile hasn't failed them, yet, somewhere in the crowd, a traveler from Egypt stands out, his linen too white, his jewelry too polished. He's trying to blend in but failing spectacularly. Local merchants humor him, selling him dyed cloth and rare spices that are, in fact, local herbs anyone could pick. You can't help but grin. Nubian humor was dry, practical, and often at the expense of those who underestimated them. In the royal quarter, the rhythm changes. Guards in leopard skin sashes stand beneath palm trees, their eyes scanning the horizon more out of habit than fear. Inside, servants polish gold vessels, fold linen, and whisper about court rumors. Whose son might be marrying whose daughter? Which priest fell asleep during ceremony again? And somewhere, behind layers of curtains, a woman watches it all. She's not yet crowned, not yet famous, but her confidence already fills the room like sunlight. You pause there, sensing a shift. History's about to pivot from merchants and miners to monarchs and mothers. The first Kandake, the Queen Mother, will soon rise, taking the reins not because she was allowed to, but because no one else could do it better. Still, This moment of quiet prosperity matters. It's the fertile ground that will grow legends. Without these smiths, scribes, and herders, there would be no thrones to sit on, no temples to restore, no reason to negotiate with Rome centuries later. History may remember the queens, but it's built by the hands of people who never signed their names. You look around one last time as the sun climbs higher. The market starts to fade into heat shimmer. The Nile gleams like molten glass. And somewhere, beyond the hills, miners return home, their gold dust mixing with sweat. A faint, glittering proof that Nubia, between its giants, has learned to stand tall. The afternoon drapes itself across the kingdom like a sheet of gold dust. You walk away from the busy market of Napata, following the gentle hum of the river toward the palace compound. The air shifts here, less chatter, more ceremony. The smell of roasted grain gives way to incense and lotus oil. The path under your feet is smoothed from years of royal processions, and palm shadows sway lazily across the sandstone walls. Somewhere nearby, a drum beats softly, calling people to gather. This is where you finally meet her, not by name yet, but by presence. The Kandake. The title rolls off your tongue like thunder wrapped in silk. In the language of Kush, it means Queen Mother. But it's not just a biological role. It's the embodiment of authority. The Kandake doesn't sit quietly beside a king. She is the king, or at least the one who tells him what to do and how to smile while doing it. Historians still argue whether every Kandake ruled alone or co-ruled with male counterparts. Some records show them as joint sovereigns. Others show them issuing decrees entirely in their own right. Either way, their portraits, carved into temple walls, leave no doubt. The queens stand taller than their male attendants, shoulders broad, gazes unwavering. Crowns spiral upward like horns, and in their hands they carry symbols of divine might. When you look at one of these carvings, you don't think queen, you think command. Imagine the court assembling, priests in white linen, scribes clutching wax tablets, envoys sweating politely as they wait for an audience. The throne room smells of sandalwood and something faintly metallic. Gold dust again, maybe. Sunlight pours through latticework, scattering patterns across the stone floor. Then she enters. Anklets whisper. Fabric rustles. The crowd bows as one body. You follow their lead, feeling the quiet gravity of her presence. This isn't Cleopatra's glamour or some medieval fairy tale queen sipping from crystal goblets. The Kandake's power is woven into ritual and lineage. In Nubia, royal blood flows through the mother's line. Succession depends not on the king's sons, but on his sisters and their children. The Queen Mother becomes the living link between past and future, a divine conduit. Without her blessing, no crown shines bright enough to matter. You can see how the system works. It's clever. By placing the lineage in the maternal line, the kingdom stabilizes. No matter who the father is, the heir is always royal. Its governance is genetic insurance. Egypt, by contrast, spent centuries writing family dramas worthy of late-night television. Nubia. They solved it with one elegant social rule. Trust the mothers. A priest clears his throat and begins reciting praises to the gods. Amun of the mountains, Isis of the river, and Apidamak, the lion-headed god of strength. His voice echoes against the walls, and you feel how religion here blends with politics seamlessly. Every divine title the priest speaks also doubles as one of the queen's qualities. She's not ruling under the gods. She's ruling with them. It's both convenient and brilliant. The Kandake sits quietly, her eyes half-lidded but fully alert. You can tell she's listening to every word, even as courtiers drone on about irrigation, taxation, and trade treaties. Her fingers drum lightly on the armrest, a rhythm of impatience disguised as poise. She knows what's coming next. Another envoy from Egypt requesting cooperation, which usually means, send us gold and we'll pretend you're equals. Yumi can almost hear her sigh internally. A messenger bows and reads a letter delivered from Thebes, formal greetings, diplomatic niceties, and a politely worded threat about border control. The queen doesn't flinch. Instead, she raises one eyebrow, the universal expression of try me. Then, with deliberate calm, she tells her scribe to reply that Nubia welcomes peace but will defend its rivers. The message is sent, and you swear you see a flicker of amusement cross her face. She's been through this before. You remember that earlier, in the marketplace. A scribe murmured about increased palm oil orders. Now you realize why royal banquets are a diplomatic tool. Food, fragrance, and formality often succeed where armies fail. Tonight, the Kandake will host a feast, and the Egyptians will be honored guests. They'll arrive thinking they're in charge, and leave unsure of who just negotiated whom. As the afternoon fades, servants prepare the palace courtyard. Reed torches line the paths, their smoke sweetened with resin. Tables are set low to the ground, covered with woven mats and trays of roasted duck, lentil stew, and honeyed figs. Palm wine chills in clay jars sunk into the cool sand. Musicians tune harps and drums, testing rhythms that sound suspiciously like heartbeat patterns. You catch the queen walking along the terrace before the feast. She moves with the deliberate pace of someone who understands spectacle. Her gold bangles catch the last light of the sun, scattering it like sparks. She pauses by a carved column depicting her mother, another Kandake before her, and for a moment, the mask of command softens. Power here isn't inherited, it's practiced, every day, under scrutiny and expectation. Historians still debate whether Kandakes truly ruled by divine right or by sheer charisma. In truth, it was probably both. The gods gave the title. The queens gave it meaning. Many reigned for decades, balancing diplomacy with domestic policy, faith with economy. Their greatest challenge wasn't invasion, but perception. How to lead without being dismissed as just a woman in a world that preferred its rulers male and easily flattered. When night finally arrives, the courtyard glows with torchlight. Guests recline on cushions pretending to relax while calculating alliances. The queen sits at the head of the feast, serene and untouchable. Musicians play softly, their melodies weaving through conversation. Laughter rises like bubbles in warm water. Every gesture, every toast, every sideways glance is a move on a board that only she can truly see. At some point, she lifts her goblet and smiles, a small, deliberate curve of the lips that says everything and nothing. The crowd stills, waiting for her words. She speaks slowly, thanking her guests for their friendship, then adds that true peace requires mutual respect. It sounds like a compliment, but everyone in the room hears the warning beneath it. Later, when the torches dim and the guests drift toward sleep, she remains awake, looking out over the river. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Egypt plots again. But for now, the Kandake sits beneath a sky full of stars and thinks, let them come. She'll be ready, with diplomacy first and a bowstring second. You lie back under the same stars, lulled by the hum of crickets and the faint scent of lotus oil. The queen's silhouette merges with the night, and you realize that history's quiet power often comes dressed in silk, armed with patience, and wearing a crown that glows softly under moonlight. The morning rises slow and red, like the glow from a forge. The air hums with the promise of heat as you make your way through the palace gardens, past rows of tamarisk trees and water basins where lotus flowers float lazily. The birds are loud today, ibises, egrets, and tiny finches gossiping in branches like courtiers after a banquet. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, a military drum rolls once, sharp and final. It's the sound of history pivoting again, this time toward one woman whose name would outlast marble and papyrus alike, Amanirenas, queen and commander of Kush. She doesn't stride into the chronicles politely, she storms in, armed with diplomacy in one hand and strategy in the other. By the time she takes the throne around 40 BCE, Egypt is no longer the dominant force it once was. Rome has swallowed it whole, and Augustus, fresh from renaming himself emperor, now stares south across the Nile, imagining gold, ivory, and land ripe for annexation. Rome, of course, always imagined that. You stand beside Amanirenas in your mind as she surveys the horizon. The queen's face is serene, but her thoughts are sharpening like blades. She's inherited not just a kingdom, but a legacy of delicate balance. Centuries of trade, alliances, and cultural pride that Rome now threatens to trample with its well-sandaled arrogance. She knows what's at stake, and unlike most rulers faced with Rome's shadow, she's not trembling. She's calculating. Historians still argue whether Amanirenas ruled alongside her husband, King Teretekes, or assumed full authority after his death. What's certain is that when Rome tried to extend its tax collection into Nubian territory, Amanirenas responded with what modern diplomats would call a strongly worded letter. Except hers involved elephants, archers, and about 2,000 soldiers. Picture it, the Nubian army moving north under a pale sun, the sound of sandals crunching over dry earth, bronze tips glinting like fireflies. Drums beat low, steady and hypnotic, setting the pace of a force that fights not for conquest, but for principle. At the front rides the queen herself, on horseback, veil lifted, eyes like obsidian. Rumors claim she lost one eye in battle. Others say it was a myth woven later to make her look fiercer. Either way, her legend gleams brighter than any polished helmet. When her army reaches the Roman outpost of Siene, modern Aswan, the desert wind carries with it a storm of arrows. Roman soldiers used to quick victories find themselves fighting ghosts, Nubian archers who vanish into the dunes and strike again from impossible angles. Amanirenas doesn't just lead the attack. She orchestrates it like music, measured, graceful, deadly. After capturing several Roman garrisons, her troops do something that will echo for centuries. They cut down a bronze statue of Augustus, behead it, and carry the emperor's metal head back to Meroe. There, she buries it under the steps of a temple, so that every worshipper would forever walk over Rome's pride. You can't help but smile at that, revenge with architectural flair, but Amanirenas is no fool. She knows Rome will retaliate, and when they do, it's brutal. General Petronius, Augustus's man in Egypt, marches south with thousands of soldiers, laying waste to cities along the way. The Kushites fight hard, but are forced to retreat deeper into their territory. Rome advances, burning Napata, the spiritual heart of the kingdom. The smoke fills the sky, and you can almost taste the ash. Still, the queen doesn't surrender. She retreats strategically, regrouping at Meroe, the newer capital nestled farther up the Nile. In the quiet that follows, she plans not a desperate counterattack, but something subtler: diplomacy. Because even the fiercest lioness knows when to hunt and when to wait. The next months blur into negotiations, spies and envoys riding through the heat. Amanirenas sends emissaries to Rome, not as supplicants but as equals. She offers terms that sound gracious but bite underneath. And after a campaign that drags on longer than Rome expected, Augustus finally agrees to peace. The terms are astonishing. No tribute owed, no occupation imposed. The border is redrawn favorably to Kush. For perhaps the first and only time in Roman history, an African queen stared down an emperor, and both blinked. But she blinked last. Historians still debate how she managed it. Some say Rome was simply tired of desert warfare. Others suggest her diplomatic charm disarmed them. Maybe it was a little of both. Imagine the scene. Roman envoys standing in her court, drenched in sweat, trying to maintain their imperial dignity as she listens, unbothered, sipping palm wine. When they finish, she smiles faintly, thanks them for coming so far, and informs them that Kush will remain free. Then she waves a hand, dismissive, regal, final. That treaty stands for decades, becoming one of the few times Rome agreed to peace without conquest. It's a masterclass in negotiation, the kind of story that makes you wonder why business schools don't teach more ancient history. You wander through Meroe after the victory. The city is alive again, smiths hammering new iron tools, merchants counting coins stamped with Roman faces, which must feel deliciously ironic, and priests singing hymns to Amun for a peace bought by wisdom and wit. The people revere Amanirenas not only as a warrior but as a protector, a mother of the nation. Children grow up playing Romans and queens, and in their version, the queen always wins. In her later years, Amanirenas rules quietly, overseeing rebuilding efforts and trade expeditions into sub-Saharan Africa. She never crowns herself empress, though she could. Her palace is filled with maps, gold, and diplomatic gifts, statues, fabrics, rare spices. But her true trophies are less tangible: independence, stability, and the satisfaction of having rewritten what power could look like. When she dies, her people mourn for a month. They say even the Nile slowed its current in respect. Her tomb stands among the pyramids of Meroe, its steep walls glowing pink at dawn. You can almost see her spirit standing there, watching the river she defended, the people she raised, the empire she outsmarted. The wind stirs, and the smell of burning incense drifts past your face. It's hard not to feel humbled. She didn't just rule, she redefined what ruling meant. Power wasn't loud or cruel here. It was patient, graceful, and calculating enough to tame even Rome. You glance back at the horizon, where the Nile bends like an arm embracing the desert. The air is still. A single ibis glides low across the water. Somewhere you imagine Amanirenas' laughter echoing faintly, half pride, half warning. Rome may have conquered half the world, but this queen taught it humility. The sun has barely climbed above the horizon when the heat already presses on your shoulders. The air tastes dry, faintly metallic, like the inside of a forge. Ahead of you, the Nile stretches northward toward Egypt, wide and indifferent, the same river that carried both blessings and battalions. On its western bank, smoke curls faintly, a memory of Rome's torch still haunting the edges of Nubia. You stand beside Amanirenas' forces as the war unfolds. The famous campaign that would make her name ripple through centuries, the War of the One-Eyed Queen. The story goes that when Rome returned to punish Kush, the queen herself met them head-on. Some chroniclers, mostly Roman of course, claimed she lost an eye in the chaos of battle and kept fighting anyway, leading her soldiers from horseback while blood streaked her cheek like war paint. Others insist the injury was propaganda, exaggerated to turn her into a desert Amazon in the eyes of outsiders. Either way, it worked. Every version begins the same. Rome underestimated her, and that was their first mistake. You can almost hear the sound of preparation. Archers testing bowstrings, metal clanging, commanders murmuring strategies beneath tents stitched from goat hide. The army breathes in unison, dust rising like incense, and at its center sits Amanirenas, calm as the river, her good eye gleaming with purpose. She's not leading from a throne now, but from the field, her commands carried through drums and banners. Historians still argue where exactly the decisive battles took place. Some say near Qasr Ibrim, others closer to Napata's ruins, but all accounts agree on one thing. The Kushites fought not to conquer, but to remind. To remind Rome that even empires bleed when they push too far into the desert. You picture the first clash. The Romans, disciplined and heavily armored, advance in tight formations, their polished shields reflecting the morning glare. Opposite them, the Nubians move like the wind, barefoot, swift, unpredictable. Their archers release volleys so thick the sky darkens for a heartbeat. The arrows hum through the heat, landing with a rhythm like rain on bronze. Then the elephants arrive. Huge, patient creatures draped in embroidered cloth, carrying riders who shout commands in Kushite dialect. The Romans freeze for just a second, long enough. The ground shakes. The elephants push forward, not as weapons of rage, but as instruments of confusion. Dust and panic rise together, and the disciplined lines break. Rome wins battles through order. Amanirenas wins through tempo. She lets them advance, then pulls back, striking their supply routes, harassing their scouts. She knows the desert better than they ever will. You can almost feel her smirk watching Roman legions sweat, armor turning into ovens under the sun. They came expecting submission. They found a ghost army that vanished into dunes and struck again at dusk. At night, the camp quiets. You sit near the fire, the smell of roasted grain and iron mingling in the air. A storyteller among the soldiers begins retelling the day's victories with generous exaggeration. Around him, warriors chuckle softly, passing a jug of beer. Farther away, the queen listens in silence. Her expression is unreadable. For every fallen Roman, one of her own has been lost too. Pride is heavy, but so is grief. A courier approaches, breathless, carrying intelligence. Rome is regrouping. Amanirenas nods slowly, instructs her generals to fall back farther south, closer to Meroe's iron heart. She knows the pattern now. Fight, vanish, rebuild. The war has become a rhythm, and she's playing the long game. As the days pass, you travel with her army deeper into Nubian land. The terrain shifts from rocky plains to stretches of acacia and scrub, the occasional oasis like a jewel in the dust. Civilians flee inland carrying baskets of grain and idols of their household gods. The queen rides among them reassuring, her voice steady even as she hides exhaustion. Leadership here isn't about speeches. It's about presence. When news reaches her that Rome has burned Napata, the old sacred capital, she closes her eyes for a long time. The priests wail, soldiers mutter curses, and the wind carries ash that smells like endings. But Amanirenas simply says, "Then they will never hold it." There's no hysteria, no despair, just the certainty of someone who's seen enough cycles of loss to know that ashes feed the soil. You follow her back to Meroe. The city braces itself, stockpiling grain, repairing fortifications, whispering prayers. Children sneak glances at the queen as she passes. They've heard the stories already, calling her Candace the One-Eyed. Some carve little clay figures with one painted eye and set them by their doorways for protection. In times of fear, mythology is comfort. Inside the palace, her council debates endlessly. One general wants to strike north again, another urges surrender. Amanirenas listens, her fingers tracing the carved lions on her armrest. When they finish, she stands. "We have already shown Rome our strength," she says. "Now we must show them our patience." The room falls silent. Diplomacy follows, a campaign of parchment and pride rather than spears. Envoys cross the Nile under flags of truce. Letters flow between Meroe and Alexandria, between Amanirenas and Augustus himself. You can almost picture the Roman emperor, miles away, frowning at her elegant handwriting, realizing this isn't a tribal skirmish but a negotiation between equals. Months pass. Skirmishes fade. Eventually, peace settles. Not declared with fanfare but acknowledged quietly, like two predators deciding the hunt isn't worth the effort. The border freezes at Maharaka. No tribute, no annexation. Rome keeps Egypt. Nubia keeps dignity. It's a draw on paper, but history remembers who initiated the terms. You walk through Meroe afterward. The streets smell of charcoal and victory. Artisans carve reliefs depicting the queen's campaigns, her silhouette astride a horse, bow drawn, crown tall. Nearby, merchants reopen stalls, selling iron tools and ivory combs. Children chase each other between the pyramids, shouting mock commands. "I am Amanirenas! You are Rome!" And laughter spills through the air. In a quiet temple corner, you find that bronze head of Augustus, its hollow eyes forever staring upward, buried beneath the queen's temple steps. Worshippers pass overhead, unaware or perhaps delighting in the irony. The empire that once tried to tax her kingdom now rests under her feet. Historians still debate how much of her legend is fact. Did she truly fight with one eye? Was the statue's burial symbolic or spontaneous? But the evidence, the treaty, the ruins, the Roman records that grudgingly call her Candace, makes one thing clear. She turned defiance into an art form. As twilight settles, you picture her final years. The war drums are quiet now, replaced by flutes and gentle conversation in the palace gardens. She sits by the river, the scar over her missing eye glinting faintly in the fading light. A servant pours her wine. She waves them away and stares toward Egypt. Somewhere far north, Augustus reclines in marble halls, perhaps remembering that one southern queen who never bowed. The queen smiles faintly, and you can almost hear her whisper, "Let him remember." You exhale slowly, letting the scene dissolve into the desert's evening hush. The war is over, but its echo lingers, soft as sand sliding through your fingers. The war fades into the memory of the dunes, and peace takes its place, fragile but fragrant, like a lotus blooming from ashes. You walk through Meroe again, not as a soldier this time, but as a guest in an age of prosperity reborn. The scent of fresh dye, perfume oils, and roasted grain fills the air. Artisans have returned to their workshops, and the clang of iron has softened into the delicate tap of goldsmiths at their benches. Here, the story of Nubian Queens turns from battlefields to beauty, from defiance to design. You follow the sound of hammering into a courtyard where sunlight bounces off 100 tiny mirrors of gold. The smiths work bare-chested in the heat, muscles glistening as they twist thin threads of metal into necklaces that look like spun sunlight. Beside them, women weave colored beads into wide collars, the kind so heavy they could probably double as neck training equipment. The queens of Kush, especially those after Amanirenas, wore gold not merely as decoration, but as declaration. Every bracelet whispered sovereignty. Every anklet chimed with diplomacy. You imagine a morning at the royal dressing chamber. Attendants bustle about, bringing trays of cosmetics and jewels. The queen sits before a bronze mirror, her reflection flickering like molten honey. A young servant grinds malachite for eyeshadow. Another mixes red ochre with fat for lip color. Someone brings a perfume jar carved from alabaster, filled with oil steeped in lotus petals and myrrh. The smell alone could humble an emperor. Historians still argue whether Nubian cosmetics were purely aesthetic or had ritual significance. Evidence suggests both. Some of the ingredients, like coal and frankincense, were believed to ward off evil spirits and sand glare in equal measure. But there's something undeniably political about it, too. When the queen stepped out draped in gold and smelling like divine smoke, she wasn't just showing taste. She was reminding the world that beauty itself could be power. As you step deeper into the palace, you pass walls painted with scenes of feasts, coronations, and trade delegations. Every guest, every servant, every animal is meticulously detailed, but your eyes keep returning to the jewelry. Bracelets stacked like armor, crowns shaped like coiled serpents, pectorals that seem to anchor the body to the throne itself. One mural shows a queen extending a golden cup to a visiting envoy. Her expression is calm, almost bored. The envoy, however, looks like he might faint under the glare of her necklace. Gold, you realize, was diplomacy's secret language. When Rome or Egypt sent emissaries, they received gifts so lavish they couldn't decide whether they'd been honored or outdone. One Roman chronicler, writing grudgingly, noted that Nubian queens displayed ornaments that would shame the treasuries of Cleopatra. You can almost hear the irritation in his stylish strokes, and then there's the matter of how they carried it all. Some jewelry pieces unearthed at Meroe weigh several kilograms. Archaeologists, bless their hearts, have quietly speculated that certain ceremonial collars might have required assistance. You smile imagining it. A queen entering a banquet, attendants carefully positioning her like a human chandelier. Still, she would have looked magnificent, gleaming like the morning sun personified. A few paces away, you find artisans crafting textiles, linens dyed in deep reds, ochres, and indigo blues. They paint patterns of birds, rivers, and spirals, symbols of eternity. The air smells faintly of crushed plants and fermented dye. Even clothing here tells stories. A ripple of fabric might hint at status. A stitch might mark royal blood. A courtier adjusts her robe, revealing embroidered scenes of elephants and palm trees, a traveling biography in thread. You wander into the royal treasury next, where objects rest in rows like sleeping stars. Boxes of ivory combs, strings of lapis lazuli beads, and tiny amulets shaped like lions and crocodiles. Each piece whispers of a trade network stretching from the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa. The queens didn't just wear the world, they owned its roots. In one corner, a scribe meticulously inventories a new arrival, 20 bracelets of hammered gold, inlaid with turquoise. He glances at you briefly, then at the list, muttering something about weight discrepancies. Apparently, gifted to Egypt sometimes translates as politely returned with interest. The books of diplomacy are never balanced. Outside, the sun catches on the pyramids of Meroe in the distance, their steep sides glittering faintly. Inside, you can still hear the whisper of bangles. Even the air feels adorned. Beauty here isn't vanity, it's economy, politics, and theology woven into metal. You imagine an evening banquet again, this time after the wars are long over. The queen sits beneath a canopy of woven reeds, gold reflecting torchlight across her skin. Musicians play soft melodies on lyres while guests murmur in languages from 3 continents. The queen lifts her hand and everyone quiets. She gestures toward a visiting merchant from the Red Sea, complimenting his offerings of spices. It's more than politeness, it's currency. In this world, grace is negotiation. Historians still debate whether the queens of Meroe viewed adornment as divine obligation or statecraft. Perhaps both. To appear radiant was to prove the gods' favor. To appear dull was to risk losing legitimacy. You can't help but admire the multitasking. Imagine ruling an empire while ensuring your eyeliner is symmetrical under 40 degrees heat. The desert outside darkens as the feast continues. Somewhere beyond the walls, a miner wipes gold dust from his hands. That same dust will soon rest on the queen's neck, transformed by artistry into something eternal. You glance at your own reflection in the palace mirror, a faint shadow, a traveler caught between centuries, and wonder how many of those jewels might still lie buried, gleaming quietly in the sand, waiting for light again. One of the attendants hums softly as she closes the treasure room doors. The tune lingers, delicate and haunting, as if the gold itself hums along. You realize that in Nubia, even silence wears jewelry. You step back into the courtyard. The moon rises over Meroe, pale and perfect, catching in the gold filigree of the queen's headdress as she walks past. Her bracelets clink softly, an accidental melody that says more than any speech could. Every sound of her adornments tells a story of victory, trade, love, resilience. And as she disappears into the palace glow, you think, empires may rise through force, but they endure through elegance. The Kandakes knew that. They wore it. The night after the feast settles warm and heavy across the city, and you wander deeper into the palace complex, drawn by the distant rhythm of clinking cups and the slow, lazy thump of hand drums. The scent of spiced wine floats in the air, mixed with roasted lentils and honeyed figs. Somewhere behind you, laughter ripples across the courtyard. The kind of laughter that only comes from people who know the art of diplomacy isn't confined to scrolls and handshakes. In Kush, peace is negotiated as often with perfume as with parchment. You step into a grand hall where servants arrange low tables draped in embroidered linen. The flicker of torchlight dances across brass goblets and polished ivory utensils. And at the head of it all sits the queen, serene, radiant, unhurried, as though the entire room moves in rhythm with her breath. This is the realm of perfume, politics, and palm wine, where a scent can sway allegiance and a toast can determine treaties. The Kandake knows that every guest here has arrived with two faces, one for conversation, one for calculation, so she prepares accordingly. The air itself is part of her strategy. A servant glides past with a censer, wafting clouds of incense made from frankincense, cedar, and resin brought by caravan from Punt, hundreds of miles away. It's sweet, warm, and a little dizzying, perfect for making visiting ambassadors feel pliable. A little too relaxed to remember the sharpness of their agenda. You settle in among the guests, surrounded by soft chatter. A delegation from Egypt sits to your left, wearing linen so fine it shimmers like morning mist. Across from them, a trader from Axum pours his wine too generously, laughing at his own jokes. Everyone's pretending not to eavesdrop on everyone else, and there at the center, the queen raises her cup. To shared peace, she says lightly, and to merchants who remember that fair trade begins with fair tongues. It's polite, musical, but you can feel the dagger of implication beneath the honey. The wine flows freely, thick, dark, brewed from dates and honey, spiced with cinnamon and cardamom. As you take a sip, the taste surprises you. Sweeter than expected, yet layered, almost smoky. Palm wine, too, is poured from clay jars cooled in the river sand. Every flavor here seems designed to loosen conversation, to blur hard edges. Historians still argue whether these banquets were purely social or strategic councils in disguise. The truth, as always, is probably both. The queens of Nubia mastered the art of soft politics, hospitality that disarmed, generosity that intimidated. To feed someone well was to claim a kind of ownership over their comfort. And in a world of fragile alliances, the Kandake ruled best by making sure her rivals left the table thinking they'd won. You notice the subtleties, the order of seating, the sequence of dishes, the way servants refill certain cups faster than others. Everything choreographed, everything intentional. The visiting envoy, who had been boasting loudly about Rome's superior trade routes, is now sweating slightly, his words slurring under the heat and wine. The queen watches him with mild amusement, a small smile playing at her lips. A musician begins to play softly, a harp tuned to the low hum of human conversation. The melody curls around you like perfume. A dancer follows, her movements fluid and deliberate, telling a story with each motion, the journey of the Nile, the courtship of Amun and his queen, the triumph of peace over chaos. The guests applaud politely, unaware that every gesture is another reminder of Kushite mythology, that the gods themselves favor balance over dominance. You glance toward the queen again. Her perfume lingers in the air, not floral but earthy, made from crushed herbs and resins. Ancient texts mention a blend called the breath of Meroa, rumored to include saffron, henna, and oil of myrrh. Some even claimed it could calm anger and cloud judgment. You can't tell if that's science or sorcery, but looking around at the softened faces of her guests, you suspect it works either way. One scribe at the corner table leans toward you, whispering that the queen's personal perfumer is said to have invented entire new methods of distillation, a kind of proto-alchemy involving clay vessels and heated sand. Modern scholars scoff at the story, but the chemical residue found in those jars centuries later hints that maybe, just maybe, he's right. Kush wasn't just borrowing beauty from Egypt or Greece, it was innovating its own. A servant passes a platter of roasted lamb glazed with date syrup. You take a bite and the taste is so rich it almost silences thought. Across the hall, conversation shifts. from trade to territory, from poetry to politics. The Egyptian envoy gestures too broadly, his bracelets jingling like bells. "Surely," he says, "Rome only seeks harmony along the Nile." The queen tilts her head, a spark of humor lighting her eyes. "Harmony," she repeats as if savoring the word. "Then perhaps they should learn to play quieter instruments." The hall erupts in polite laughter, though no one misses the edge beneath her tone. It's diplomacy disguised as wit, a strategy older than steel. As the feast continues, servants move through the room refilling lamps, replacing fruit bowls, adjusting tapestries. The air grows thick with warmth and scent. Outside, the desert wind sighs softly, pressing against the palace walls like an eavesdropper. Later, when the last song fades and the guests finally stumble back to their quarters, you linger. The queen remains seated alone, her fingers tracing the rim of her goblet. The torches throw long shadows across the floor. She exhales slowly as though releasing the weight of all the words she didn't say tonight. You realize that diplomacy here isn't about deception. It's about restraint. The Kandake knows when to charm, when to tease, when to terrify, and most importantly, when to let silence do the talking. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Nile flows steady, carrying the echo of her voice downstream toward Egypt, perhaps even to Rome itself. You imagine some senator centuries later still frowning, trying to recall why the smell of myrrh makes him uneasy. You walk out into the courtyard, the night warm on your skin. Behind you, laughter fades. Ahead, the stars shimmer above the pyramids, quiet witnesses to a kingdom that learned how to turn elegance into armor. In Kush, after all, perfume wasn't just fragrance. It was strategy, invisible, intoxicating, and impossible to resist. The night fades into a pale, misty dawn, and the sound of chisels begins again, metal tapping stone, slow and steady, like a heartbeat echoing through centuries. You follow the rhythm toward the hills north of Meroe, where the royal builders have begun work on something new. Temples carved not only to honor gods, but to immortalize the queens themselves. The air smells of limestone dust and crushed acacia. The sun hasn't yet burned away the coolness, and you can almost imagine the ghosts of architects pacing with reed rulers and sketches etched into the sand. This is the age of temples, the era when the Kandakes began shaping stone to match their spirits. Some of these structures will still stand thousands of years later, silent and half-buried, their reliefs sharp enough to catch the first light of morning. They're not built for spectacle alone. They are the living script of a civilization's confidence. As you approach the site, the first thing you notice are the workers. Bare feet scuff against the sandstone, muscles taut as ropes as they drag massive blocks into alignment. Their chants rise with each pull, a rhythmic hum that sounds almost like prayer. Supervisors call out commands, scribes mark progress, and artisans crouch over panels, carving scenes of divine coronations and celestial offerings. Every stroke tells a story, of gods pleased, of queens crowned, of a nation that sees beauty as proof of survival. The temple they're building today is dedicated to Amun, the god who, in Kush, has taken on a distinctly Nubian personality. Unlike Egypt's version, Amun of Napata and Meroe wears a curved ram's horn and dwells in mountain sanctuaries. His priests whisper that he speaks most clearly to queens, not kings. You smile, realizing how conveniently theological that is. Historians still argue whether the cult of Amun in Nubia was a holdover from Egyptian influence or a deliberate act of reclamation. Whatever the case, the symbolism is unmistakable, a divine endorsement of matriarchy. In these temples, the Kandake stands before Amun as an equal, offering incense and gold not as a supplicant, but as a partner. The carvings show her towering beside the god, one hand raised in greeting, the other holding a scepter shaped like a lotus blooming from a spear. You step closer to a nearly finished wall relief. The detail takes your breath away. The queen's face is serene, her features full, strong nose, almond eyes, lips slightly curved as if suppressing amusement. Her crown spirals upward, ending in a sun disk flanked by cobras. Around her neck rests a collar of 30 gold plates. Her bare arms are inscribed with tiny lines of hieroglyphs and Meroitic script, two languages entwined like diplomacy carved in stone. The artist pauses, wiping sweat from his brow. He steps back, squints, then adds one final chisel mark to the queen's smile. It's a small adjustment, barely visible, but somehow it transforms the entire expression. She no longer looks merely royal. She looks alive, amused by eternity. You turn toward the interior, where a priest in white linen murmurs blessings. He carries a vessel of incense that releases curls of smoke smelling faintly of myrrh and salt. His voice echoes softly as he calls upon the gods to breathe within the stone. You catch the rhythm of his words, the way reverence and routine merge into one slow, hypnotic chant. Inside, the columns rise thick and low, built to mimic the forest of papyrus that once lined the Nile. Rays of sunlight slice through slits in the ceiling, cutting across the dust-filled air like golden threads. The floor beneath you feels cool, worn smooth by countless bare feet. You sense that this temple, like the queens it honors, isn't just meant to impress, it's meant to endure. Outside again, a group of musicians begins to play. Drums and flutes echo against the stone, and a small crowd gathers, courtiers, soldiers, scribes, watching the queen herself arrive for the consecration. She's draped in a gown of linen so fine it almost disappears in the light, her skin glowing bronze beneath layers of jewelry. Children scatter petals before her feet. The workers kneel as she passes, their faces a mixture of awe and affection. When she reaches the entrance, the priest hands her a golden chisel. She taps it once against the temple wall, murmuring something in a low voice. Then she smiles, a quiet, knowing smile that says she understands exactly what she's doing. This isn't vanity, it's legacy management. Later that night, when the moon hangs full above the site, the workers stay behind, lighting oil lamps inside the temple. You wander among them, feeling the warmth of freshly carved stone. Shadows of gods and queens flicker across the walls, as though the carvings themselves breathe. One worker points upward to a relief of the queen offering a bowl to the stars. That, he says softly, is how she feeds the sky. You nod, letting the words settle. It's an image you can't shake. The idea that these women, who ruled amid desert heat and political storms, still found time to imagine themselves as caretakers of the cosmos. Maybe that's what set them apart. Their power wasn't just earthly. It was celestial in ambition, gentle in execution. Historians often compare these Nubian temples to Egyptian ones, pointing out the similar architecture, the borrowed gods. But standing here, surrounded by the sound of chisels and the smell of burning oil, you know better. These are not copies. They are replies. Every column, every carving, every hieroglyph says, "We were here too. We built our own heaven from sand and sun." As the night deepens, you lie back on the warm ground outside the temple. The stars above feel impossibly close, reflecting in the polished stone like pinpricks of molten gold. The temple looms above you, half shadow, half starlight, a silent monument to a civilization that didn't need to shout to be heard. The wind shifts, carrying the faint echo of chisels slowing, resting. Somewhere within the temple, a final lamp flickers out. The smoke rises, twisting upward, until it becomes one with the stars. And you think, when people say history is carved in stone, they rarely realize how soft that stone once was, how human hands shaped it in devotion and sweat. Here in Nubia, even rock remembers the touch of queens. The next morning drifts in slow and bright, sunlight turning the sandstone temples into fields of gold. You walk along the sacred avenue that leads away from the city toward the river, where priests and scribes gather in clusters beneath wide awnings. The air hums with purpose. Every scroll, every word, every carved line is part of a single invisible network, the language of power. For centuries, Nubia has existed between tongues, Egyptian, Meroitic, Greek, Latin, and yet you notice the Kandakes have never seemed lost in translation. They know exactly how to speak to everyone, and when to say nothing at all. You stop near a scribe who's bent over a piece of tanned leather, tracing characters with a reed pen dipped in black ink. At first glance, it looks like Egyptian hieroglyphs, tiny birds, serpents, suns, but look closer and you see the difference. The lines are sharper, the curves more deliberate, like someone taking an old melody and composing a new one. This is Meroitic script, the written voice of the Kushite Empire, born not from imitation but from evolution. Historians still argue how it was developed. Some claim it grew directly from Egyptian cursive. Others suggest it combined local Nubian dialects into something entirely new. Whatever its origin, it marks a turning point. the moment the Kushites stopped merely borrowing symbols of power and began writing their own. The irony, of course, is that to this day, the Meroitic language remains only partially deciphered. You can read the names of gods and queens, yes, but not their whispers, their thoughts, their jokes, their griefs. The words survive, but the meaning sleeps. You picture a royal scribe presenting a decree to Queen Amanirenas, Amanirenas' successor, a woman known for her flair, her wisdom, and her treasury full of gold and green stones. The parchment gleams faintly in the morning light. She reads in silence, her lips moving ever so slightly as if tasting each word. Then she nods, takes the stylus, and signs her name in Meroitic script, a sequence of curves and dots, elegant as jewelry. In that single act, she reaffirms her identity as both queen and author of her own empire. Nearby, another scribe copies hymns onto a wall, dedicating a new temple to Isis. His assistant reads aloud as he writes, his voice rising in cadence. She who bends time, she who grants wisdom, she who hears the silent heart. The cadence rolls like the river itself, steady, patient, eternal. You realize that language here isn't just for communication. It's performance, ritual, magic. To write something is to make it exist. The act of inscription is itself a blessing. That's why every royal edict, every tax record, every hymn is written with precision bordering on obsession. Words aren't just recorded. They're built. As you wander deeper into the palace library, you catch the smell of ink and oil lamps. Scrolls line the walls in woven baskets, records of trade, harvests, and celestial omens. You pull one out carefully. The symbols loop and dance across the surface, alive even after 2,000 years. You can't read them, but you can feel them. The weight of intention, the power of preservation. One scribe notices your fascination and chuckles softly. Words are spirits, he says, tapping his scroll. Once they are written, they do not die. They wait. You imagine the Kandake using that knowledge to rule, not just through armies and treaties, but through written will. An order sealed in ink travels farther than any soldier. A decree carved in stone outlasts every border. Outside again, you follow a procession heading toward the temple of Amun. The queen walks at its head, her robe catching the morning breeze, her headdress shimmering with turquoise. Priests flank her sides, holding banners embroidered with hieroglyphs and Meroitic signs. As they move, the banners ripple, turning language itself into movement. At the temple entrance, she stops. A priest steps forward, holding a golden tablet engraved with two languages, Egyptian on one side, Meroitic on the other. He lifts it high for the crowd to see, a public declaration that Nubia speaks in dual tongues, both fluent and proud. It's propaganda, yes, but it's also poetry. The message is clear. We understand you, but you will never fully understand us. You step closer as the queen addresses the assembly. Her voice is soft, but carries across the courtyard. Words are bridges, not chains. We do not borrow speech to serve. We use it to rule. The crowd bows their heads. You feel goosebumps crawl up your arms. Later that evening, in a quieter part of the palace, a scholar from Alexandria sits with a Kushite linguist. The Greek man gestures wildly, trying to pronounce Meroitic syllables. The linguist smiles patiently, correcting him. No, she says. You must breathe with it. It's not written for the tongue, it's written for the wind. The idea makes him blink, lost. She laughs softly and pours him more wine. The two spend the night trading alphabets, the candle between them burning low. You can't help but think how fitting it is that Meroitic remains mysterious. Maybe the queens wanted it that way, a language no conqueror could fully claim. Even today, archaeologists pore over fragments of texts, decoding one symbol, then another, never quite reaching the heart of the message. It's as if the Kandakes are still whispering, not everything was meant for you to know. As the night deepens, you stand by the riverbank, the water glinting silver under the moon. Somewhere upstream, a scribe finishes carving another royal decree into stone, sealing the future in a script no invader will ever master. The chisel's sound blends with the ripple of water, a lullaby in two languages. You take a slow breath and smile. For all Rome's marble and Egypt's papyrus, only the queens of Kush left behind a language that still refuses to bow. The wind rises gently, carrying with it faint echoes of vowels you'll never decipher, consonants that slip like sand through the mind. You close your eyes listening, You don't need to understand the words to feel their meaning. Power, after all, doesn't always translate, it resonates. The sound of the chisels and chanting fades as you move away from the temple district, following the call of gulls and the scent of wet reeds. The river spreads wide and calm before you, silver under the morning sun. It's here, on this lifeline of the world, that the kingdom breathes. You can almost hear it, the creak of wooden boats, the splash of oars, the laughter of traders. The Nile is not just a river. It's a thoroughfare, a message system, and a mirror of power. It connects the royal courts with distant tribes, foreign markets, and unseen allies. You step onto a dock built of rough-hewn logs and sun-bleached rope. Barges loaded with goods drift lazily in the current. Bundles of ebony, stacks of ostrich feathers, ivory tusks, gold ingots wrapped in linen, baskets of dates, and pottery painted in the ochres of the desert. The air hums with trade, each transaction both a prayer and a performance. Somewhere, a sailor hums a tune to keep rhythm with the river's flow. Historians still argue how far the Kushite trade networks reached. Some evidence suggests that caravans from Meroe stretched as far as the Red Sea and across the savannas to Lake Chad. Others claim that Nubian merchants bartered with Indian traders through Arabian ports, exchanging ivory for spices and silk. Standing here watching a ship's sails fill with the breath of the morning wind, you can almost believe every story. You climb aboard one of the larger boats. The deck is low, the air thick with the scent of pitch and resin used to waterproof the hull. Sailors move gracefully, balancing jars, checking ropes, joking about crocodiles that supposedly understand commands in 3 languages. The captain, a wiry man with skin like polished bronze, bows to you briefly before shouting orders. The crew responds in a mix of tongues, half Egyptian, half Nubian, half something else entirely. The river bends, and the city shrinks behind you. Ahead lies the open expanse of the desert, its dunes glowing white and gold. You pass fishermen standing knee-deep in the water, tossing woven nets that glimmer like cobwebs in sunlight. Beyond them, date palms lean over the banks like sleepy guardians. The air feels alive, buzzing with insects, birds, and the whisper of sails snapping in the wind. Your fellow passengers include traders, priests, and a woman carrying jars of indigo dye. She smiles when she catches your curious glance. "For the Queen's cloth," she says, lifting a jar slightly. "No other blue lasts this long." The desert tries to eat color, but this one survives. You realize that even commerce here carries poetry. As the boat glides downstream, you pass a caravan visible on the far shore. Camels laden with goods, their drivers shimmering in the heat. Land and water trade weave together seamlessly, forming the arteries of an empire that thrives on motion. You watch a courier disembark from another vessel, clutching a satchel sealed with the royal insignia. He's part of the Desert Courier Network, the ancient equivalent of a postal service, connecting outposts across hundreds of miles. Messages travel by horse, camel, or even drumbeat. A sound code passed from village to village, faster than most armies could march. Historians still debate whether these drum codes were standardized or improvised, but fragments of oral tradition suggest an astonishing precision. A few short beats could mean safe passage, while others warned of floods, taxes, or incoming visitors from Rome. Imagine that, messages leaping across sand faster than papyrus could dry. The wind picks up. Your boat passes a small shrine on the riverbank, a weathered stone hut where travelers leave offerings of fish or flowers. The pilot murmurs a short prayer as you drift by. "For good current," he explains. You toss in a handful of grain and watch it scatter across the water, sinking like a benediction. By midday, the air grows heavy with heat. The sailors loosen their robes and the horizon ripples like molten glass. You pass another fleet of vessels moving north, barges filled with iron from Meroe's furnaces, destined for the markets of Egypt. You realize how much of the kingdom's wealth depends on this balance: gold and iron, desert and river, diplomacy and trade. Even the Nile seems to understand politics. It flows both ways, depending on the season. At one stop, you disembark to stretch your legs. The port is small but bustling, surrounded by mud brick warehouses. A man sells roasted fish dusted with salt. Another offers papyrus scrolls inscribed with love poems. Children dart between the stalls, laughing, their feet slapping against the damp clay. Overhead gulls circle, waiting for scraps. It's a noisy, joyful chaos, the kind that makes a civilization feel alive. A merchant invites you to his booth, proudly displaying goods from faraway lands, lapis from Afghanistan, cinnamon from India, glass beads from the Mediterranean. All roads lead to Meroe, he says with a grin, and from Meroe, all treasures flow. You can't help but think how right he is. The afternoon light softens, turning the river bronze. The captain signals it's time to depart again. As the boat drifts away, you glance back at the traders waving from the dock. For a moment, you imagine the vast invisible web connecting them all, routes carved by footsteps and wind, roads that never truly end. The queen, you realize, controls more than borders. She controls the flow of movement, of goods, gossip, even dreams. Every jar of oil, every bolt of cloth, every rumor of Rome passes under her invisible gaze. As night falls, you watch the stars appear, slowly, one by one, mirrored in the water below. The Nile glows faintly, silver veins threading through black earth. Somewhere downstream, Meroe sleeps, its furnaces dimmed, its courtyards cool. Somewhere upstream, Egypt hums restlessly, always watching. You close your eyes, letting the gentle rocking of the boat lull you into that space between waking and dreaming. The sound of oars fades into the pulse of your own heartbeat. You think about those desert couriers, those river captains, those scribes writing in languages half forgotten. All of them, unknowingly, serving the same purpose, to keep the world connected under the queen's watchful eyes. Power in Kush doesn't roar, it flows. The morning mist drifts off the Nile like thin silk, and the city of Meroe begins to stir again. The air smells faintly of clay and incense, and the horizon shimmers with movement. Envoys arriving, caravans assembling, and royal banners catching the first rays of light. You walk through the palace gates where another day of diplomacy is about to unfold. The guards, draped in leopard skin sashes, bow as a procession enters the courtyard. They move with precise rhythm, their steps syncing with the beat of a small drum. At the front are the ambassadors in linen and leopard skin, emissaries from lands near and far, carrying messages, gifts, and more often than not, delicate egos. You watch them line up, a tall man from Egypt with rings heavy enough to sink a boat, a priestly envoy from Axum clutching a polished tusk carved with his king's seal, a trader from the Greek islands whose pale robes flutter like sails, and two men from Arabia, perfumed with frankincense so thick you could mistake it for fog. They bow in unison before the throne, and the great hall quiets. The queen appears, not with fanfare but with presence. Draped in ivory linen and gold that gleams without arrogance, she steps onto the dais and sits with the calm of someone who understands that stillness itself can command a room. Her gaze sweeps across the assembly, assessing, not judging. She gestures for them to rise. You feel the shift in air as the envoys straighten. This is diplomacy, Nubian style. No raised voices, no forced smiles, no false humility. Just the careful dance of tone and timing. A herald announces the first envoy. The Egyptian steps forward, his words practiced and polished. He praises the queen's wisdom, the fertility of her lands, the beauty of her temples, each compliment heavy with hidden intent. The governor of Aswan sends his greetings, he says, and hopes that trade between our noble lands may continue without interruption. The queen nods slightly, motioning to her interpreter. The reply flows like honey, but with a hint of steel beneath. Trade thrives on respect, and respect thrives on balance. May neither be broken. The Egyptian hesitates, unsure if he's been flattered or warned. Next comes the envoy from Axum. His gift, a pair of elephant tusks etched with scenes of hunting and harvest, is presented with both hands. A token, he says, from a king who values peace more than conquest. The queen accepts it graciously, though you can see her eyes flicker, calculating the political meaning behind the choice. Elephants, after all, are both trophies and metaphors for power. Historians still argue how much of Kushite diplomacy was ceremonial versus substantive. But from what you're seeing, every gesture matters. When the queen reaches out to accept a gift, she's not just acknowledging generosity. She's binding the giver to her in obligation. The Greek merchant steps forward next, his speech a little too casual. He gestures broadly, extolling the virtues of mutual prosperity and shared cultural advancement. His translator struggles to keep up with his enthusiasm. When he mentions Greek philosophy, you catch the faintest smile from the queen, amused, not impressed. In Kush, she says, we've learned that wisdom travels more easily than marble. We have no shortage of either. The room ripples with polite laughter. Then finally, the Arabian envoys approach. They speak of incense routes, salt caravans, and shared security across the Red Sea. They present a silver mirror, polished so finely you can see the queen's reflection shimmer in its surface. She studies it for a moment before turning it toward the assembly. Every kingdom, she says, sees its own face in the mirror of its neighbors. May ours always reflect goodwill. That's the heart of her craft, diplomacy through metaphor. She speaks so gracefully that by the time her words are translated, their edge has softened, but the meaning lingers. Later, during the private reception, the envoys dine under a shaded portico. The breeze carries the smell of roasted barley, dates, and sweet wine. You sit at the edge of the gathering, watching alliances form in fragments of conversation. Deals are hinted at with a raised eyebrow. Loyalties tested with laughter that's a little too forced. A musician plays softly in the background. The rhythm is slow, meditative, a heartbeat for negotiations. The queen listens to her guests, responding sparingly. Sometimes she says nothing at all, and somehow that silence commands more respect than any speech. Historians still debate how much authority these queens wielded directly, but every surviving inscription suggests they weren't mere figureheads. They received ambassadors, signed treaties, and issued orders under their own names. In one stele found near the Nile, a Kandake's decree grants foreign traders safe passage, so long as they bring gifts of sincerity, not deceit. You can practically hear her smirk in the stone. By afternoon, the formalities end. The envoys withdraw, their servants trailing behind with chests of gifts and scrolls. Some smile with relief. Others look uneasy, perhaps realizing they've been outmaneuvered by a single woman with more poise than an entire senate. As the queen retreats to her chambers, you follow from a respectful distance. She pauses at a balcony overlooking the city. The wind toys with her veil, lifting it just enough to reveal a faint smile. Below, the streets hum with trade, laughter, and prayer. Her empire isn't the largest, but it's alive, pulsing with confidence. She turns slightly and speaks, almost to herself. They think peace is given. It's not. It's arranged. You can hear the dry humor in her tone, a gentle acknowledgement that diplomacy is less about sincerity and more about choreography. The sun dips lower. Courtiers light torches as the Nile begins to shimmer orange. You watch the last of the ambassadors depart, their caravans already winding through the dunes. They'll return to their kings with reports, each one convinced they've secured advantage. None of them will realize until later that the queen has already set the terms. You linger on the balcony after she leaves. The wind carries the faint smell of myrrh and river reeds. Below, the sound of drums begins again, marking the shift from daylight to twilight, business to ritual, words to silence. In Kush, diplomacy isn't a mask. It's a mirror. Every visitor leaves seeing exactly what the queen allows them to see. Twilight settles over Meroe like a copper veil. The torches burn low, and the city hums softly with that in-between energy, part marketplace, part meditation. You follow the sound of chanting up the temple stairs, where the air grows dense with incense. Inside, shadows dance across the walls, tall figures of priests and priestesses moving in time to drums that throb like a second heart. Here, in the sanctuary of Amun, politics and prophecy weave together so tightly that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. At the far end of the hall, the high priest stands beneath a golden ram-headed idol, his arms lifted, palms open. Amun, father of the kings and the queens, he intones, breathe wisdom into your servants. The crowd responds in low unison, a murmuring wave that rises and falls like wind through reeds. You glance around. Half the people here are temple attendants, half royal officials. Everyone is listening for signs, omens that could be read as divine approval or political direction. In Kush, religion isn't separate from rule. It is rule. The gods are woven into the machinery of government as cleanly as ink in papyrus. And nobody understands this better than the Kandake. She doesn't need to preach. Her very presence at the altar is enough to say, "The gods favor me." A side door opens and she enters. The chanting shifts instantly. The queen walks slowly toward the altar, her crown gleaming in the flickering light. The priests bow, their movements practiced yet sincere. She kneels briefly, offering a carved bowl filled with milk and gold dust. The liquid catches the torchlight. It's like watching sunlight being poured back into the earth. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were acts of genuine faith or well-orchestrated political theater. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. For the Kandake, devotion and diplomacy were twin tools. Every offering reinforced legitimacy. Every hymn reminded the people that the queen's will and the god's will were indistinguishable. You notice the hierarchy within the temple, each priest moving carefully, knowing that every gesture is being read like scripture. Behind the rituals, there's tension. A young priest murmurs a verse too early. An older one glares. You can almost feel the undercurrent. Whose prophecy carries more weight? Whose interpretation will the queen favor? When the ceremony ends, the priests escort her to the inner chamber, where only the highest officials may enter. You follow in imagination. The chamber is smaller, quieter. On the walls, faint paintings show earlier rulers making offerings, their names half worn away by time. The queen sits on a low stool, a priest standing beside her with a tablet. He begins reciting omens from last night's eclipse, details about the color of the moon, the direction of the wind, the behavior of the ibis at dawn. It sounds poetic until you realize it's a political forecast in code. He concludes, "The shadow passed swiftly, and the east wind prevailed." The queen nods once. "Then we will do the same." A decision has been made, perhaps about trade, perhaps about war, but no one outside this room will know. It will simply appear later as divine will. You step back into the open air. The night is deep now, the stars sharp. Temple servants file out carrying trays of offerings, bread, beer, roasted meat to distribute among the poor. It's part ritual, part social policy. Feed the hungry and they will bless both God and queen. Somewhere nearby, a group of women sings a hymn to Isis, their voices rising pure and steady. She who shelters the lost, she who restores what was taken. The melody drifts over the courtyard like a benediction. You pause beside a column carved with reliefs of lions, rams, and lotus blossoms. The stone still radiates the day's heat. A priestess approaches, her arms covered in ink tattoos, symbols of protection and lineage. She smiles faintly. "When the god speaks," she says, "the queen listens." When the queen speaks, the world listens. It is the same voice, only echoed. You watch her disappear into the shadows, her words lingering in the air. In Nubia, theology isn't merely about heaven. It's the art of persuasion draped in incense. Every oracle, every omen, every sacred decree reinforces the structure of the state. Historians sometimes call this divine propaganda, but standing here, you sense something gentler. The people believe, not blindly, but rhythmically. Faith here is like breathing, automatic, continuous, unforced. Even the most cynical merchant who curses taxes at noon will whisper a prayer to a moon before sailing at dawn. The system works because it's woven into every heartbeat. Later that night, you climb the outer wall of the temple. Below you, the city stretches out in flickering light. Smoke from household fires curls upward, carrying the smell of bread and sesame. Somewhere a dog barks, then silence settles again. From this height, you can see the faint line of the Nile, gleaming silver under the moon, and beyond it, the darker silhouette of mountains said to be a moon's resting place. The wind shifts, carrying the last fragments of chanting from inside the temple. The queen's voice joins briefly, low and sure, before fading. You realize she's not praying for victory or wealth tonight. She's praying for clarity, an answer that will shape the next day's decisions. The gods might grant it, or maybe she'll make it up herself and call it divine insight. Either way, it will guide a kingdom. You close your eyes. The drums have stopped now. Only the cicadas remain, steady and endless. Somewhere in that rhythm, you can almost hear the line between sacred and political blur completely. The people will wake tomorrow, plant their fields, repair their boats, trade their goods, and believe the gods smiled on them again. Maybe they did. Maybe it was just good governance disguised as faith. In Nubia, the difference hardly matters. The result is the same, harmony. The following dawn glows with the pale shimmer of dust and dew. The city hums softly awake, but you find yourself drawn to the edge of the royal compound where a line of horses waits. their harnesses glinting with bronze rings. A journey is about to begin, one that will carry the queen beyond the comfort of her temples and courts, out into the plains and mountains where power must still be shown face to face. You join the caravan as it moves through the city gates. The procession is long and regal, soldiers with spears that catch the rising sun, scribes with scrolls strapped to their backs, servants balancing baskets of dried figs and water jars, and a handful of priests murmuring travel prayers. At the center rides the queen, calm as ever, her posture straight despite the uneven desert road. Her robe flows like smoke behind her, and her crown, though smaller today, gleams as though it holds a private sunrise. The road stretches ahead, a thread through golden sand and scrub. Villages appear like mirages, small clusters of huts made from mud and straw, each marked by a single acacia tree. Children run out to watch the royal procession pass, some wave. Others simply stare, wide-eyed at the woman whose name they've heard in prayers but never seen in flesh. You can feel the weight of the moment. These visits are not mere pageantry, they're performance governance. In a world without cameras or newspapers, a queen's presence is the only headline that matters. Her appearance says the kingdom is strong. The queen is watching. At the first stop, the caravan halts near a village by a shallow bend of the Nile. The smell of fish, smoke, and wet reeds fills the air. Women bring bowls of lentil stew and honey cakes as offerings. The local chief bows deeply before the queen, his hair gray, his hands calloused from labor. He presents a small wooden idol, a carving of a lion. "Protector of our people," he says. "May it guard you as it guards us." She accepts it with a smile, her voice soft yet steady. "And may your children grow under skies that never forget the rain." The crowd murmurs approval, half in awe, half in gratitude. You can feel the ease she brings, authority wrapped in warmth. Historians still argue whether these tours were spiritual pilgrimages, tax inspections, or public relations exercises. But as you watch her greet fishermen, farmers, and smiths, it's clear they are all three at once. Every gesture matters. When she touches a child's shoulder, when she eats the local bread, when she pauses to listen to a woman complain about floodwaters washing away her garden. Power, here, is not distant. It walks barefoot through the mud. By midday, the sun burns high. The caravan moves again, crossing stretches of open desert where wind carves ripples into the sand like ocean waves. The heat presses down, relentless. You wrap your scarf tighter, squinting at the horizon. The queen rides ahead, unflinching, her eyes fixed on the shimmering distance. There's a rumor among the guards that she never sweats, a poetic exaggeration. Perhaps, but one that feels true when you look at her now. Gleaming but composed, as if the desert itself were her ally. The next stop is a fortified outpost on a rocky hill. Soldiers there greet her with cheers, their armor dented, their spirits high. They've been guarding trade caravans against raiders from the west. The captain kneels before her, offering a spearhead of iron. "Forged in your name," he says. She examines it briefly, then returns it to him. "Then keep it sharp," she replies. The men laugh, half in pride, half in fear of failing her expectations. In the evening, the caravan camps near a cluster of ancient tombs, their stone doorways half buried in sand. The sky explodes in color, rose, amber, indigo, before the stars rise one by one. Fires crackle. Servants prepare roasted goat and thick bread. The air fills with the smell of coriander and smoke. You sit among the courtiers, listening to stories passed around like bowls of stew. A bard begins to play a small lyre, his voice low and rhythmic. He sings of a queen who once tamed the river spirits by offering them gold. Someone jokes that the spirits probably raised their taxes instead. Laughter ripples through the camp. Even the queen smiles faintly, though her eyes remain on the horizon. Later, as the fires burn low, she walks alone toward the tombs. You follow at a respectful distance. The air cools quickly. The sand sighs beneath your feet. She stops before one of the tombs and kneels, pressing her hand against the worn carvings. The glyphs are old, older than memory, their edges softened by time. "My ancestors," she murmurs, "built without forgetting." There's reverence in her tone, but also resolve. You realize this journey isn't just about presence. It's about continuity. Each stop, each offering, each conversation ties the living kingdom to its dead guardians. Every queen walks the same path, adding her footprints to those already half buried by sand. Historians still debate how literal these ancestral devotions were, whether the Kandakes believed their predecessors' spirits guided them or whether it was symbolic homage to legitimacy. Either way, it worked. Standing here, you feel the weight of generations pressing gently on your shoulders. A quiet reminder that legacy is built not in palaces, but in footsteps that refuse to fade. The wind rises suddenly, carrying fine dust that glitters in the moonlight. You close your eyes against it, and when you open them again, the queen is standing upright, her cloak billowing like a banner. For a moment, she seems larger than life, her silhouette framed by the ancient tombs, past and present in perfect symmetry. When she returns to camp, she says little. The guards rise as she passes. The priests bow. She disappears into her tent where a single lamp flickers inside. The rest of the camp slowly quiets. The laughter fades. The fire dims. The night reclaims its stillness. You lie awake for a while, staring up at the endless desert sky. The stars seem to pulse, their light reflecting off the dunes like scattered gold. Somewhere nearby, the Nile hums faintly, eternal as breath. You think about the journey, how power to endure must keep moving. It can't sit too long on a throne or hide behind walls. It has to travel, to show its face, to touch the world it governs. In the silence of the desert, you understand why the Kandakes ruled so long. They knew how to turn motion into majesty. Morning comes softly, a pale light spilling over the dunes like water. The camp stirs before the sun fully clears the horizon, horses snorting, pots clinking, the low murmur of servants preparing for another day's march. You stretch, feeling the faint chill still clinging to the sand. The queen is already awake, standing at the edge of the camp with her attendants, her gaze fixed eastward where the first light catches the glint of the Nile far below. Today is not about ceremony. It's about the pulse of the land itself, the rhythms of work, trade, and survival that feed the crown as surely as devotion does. The queen's mission is simple, to see the lifeblood of her kingdom moving, to feel it with her own hands, not just read it on parchment. You follow the caravan as it descends from the rocky plateau into the wide basin where the fields of Meroe begin. The air thickens with the smell of soil and wet reeds. Farmers bend low among the crops, their bodies rhythmic, bending and straightening like reeds themselves. They are harvesting grain, barley and millet mostly, using short curved knives that gleam in the light. Each handful they gather is tossed into woven baskets that overflow with golden dust. The queen dismounts to walk among them. Her sandals sink slightly into the damp earth, but she doesn't flinch. The farmers pause, unsure whether to bow or keep working. She gestures for them to continue, and soon the rhythm resumes. Snip, rustle, thump. The sound fills the morning, steady and ancient. A woman offers her a small handful of grain. "The earth was kind this year," she says shyly. The queen takes it, examines it, then lets it slip between her fingers. "Kind," she repeats, "because you were." The compliment lands with more weight than any decree. Historians still argue about how much of the Kushite economy was centralized versus communal. What's clear is that its strength came not from massive estates or forced labor, but from coordination, the delicate web between state and village. Each harvest, a portion went to local storage, a portion to taxes, and a portion to temples. It wasn't perfect, but it kept famine at bay and loyalty intact. You walk beside a young overseer who points out irrigation ditches dug by hand. The system is ingenious. Simple channels guiding Nile water into the fields, timed with the floods. "We follow the moon," he explains. "When she swells, the river swells. When she shrinks, we mend the walls." You smile, realizing that here, celestial rhythm and agriculture are the same science. Nearby, blacksmiths have set up a forge beneath a canopy of palm leaves. Sparks leap from their hammers as they shape iron blades and farming tools. The air hums with heat and the smell of molten metal. One of them grins at you through the smoke. "Meroe feeds the earth," he says, "and the earth feeds Meroe." That's no metaphor. Meroe's soil hides vast iron deposits, and its furnaces burn almost day and night. You can hear them in the distance, a low, steady roar like thunder under the ground. The iron here isn't just for tools or weapons. It's wealth, influence, bargaining power. The Romans might have their legions, but the queens of Kush have the metal that makes those legions possible. You pass a group of potters shaping clay into vessels, their hands moving in hypnotic circles. Each pot is identical yet unique, a balance between order and imperfection. They dip their fingers in pigment, painting patterns of spirals and waves. When you ask what they mean, one woman smiles and says, "The river never forgets its path." Neither do we. The queen pauses by their stall. She lifts a pot, turning it slowly in her hands. The painted lines catch the light like ripples of water. "Beautiful," she says softly, "and practical." The potter laughs. "That's how we survive, Your Majesty." It's a simple answer, but you sense the queen values it more than 1,000 royal flatteries. By midday, the caravan moves again toward the industrial quarter. The sound of the furnaces grows louder, rhythmic like a heartbeat beneath the city. The heat here is intense. Men and women shovel charcoal into massive clay kilns, while others pour molten metal into molds. Sparks fly, tiny suns in the shadows. You watch as a smith pulls an ingot from the fire, red, glowing, alive. He plunges it into a trough of water, and it hisses like a startled snake. Steam curls upward, briefly hiding his face. The queen watches, her expression unreadable. Then she says quietly, "A kingdom that shapes iron shapes its future." Her advisor nods. "And the fire never sleeps, Majesty." Historians still debate how these ironworks were organized. Were they state-controlled, family-run, something in between? What's certain is that they transformed Meroe into one of the ancient world's great industrial centers. Archaeologists still find slag heaps taller than houses, proof that entire hills were melted and remade in pursuit of strength. As the afternoon wanes, you notice children gathering leftover slag to use in pottery glaze. Even waste becomes resource. Nothing here is idle. The rhythm of labor is not frantic, just endless, like the Nile itself. You step back, watching the city breathe. Smoke curls into the fading sky, turning the sunset into a swirl of gold and ash. Traders pass, leading donkeys burdened with ore. Priests walk by carrying incense for blessing the workers. Women sing songs that weave between hammer blows like threads of calm through chaos. It's noisy, it's hot, it's imperfect, and it's alive. When the queen finally returns to the palace, she carries the day's dust on her robe but no sign of exhaustion. She pauses at the gate, glancing back at the furnaces. "They burn," she murmurs, "because we do." Then she smiles, a rare, tired, genuine smile, and steps inside. The sky darkens fully now. The stars emerge, faint at first, then bright, glittering above the smoke. You sit near the river, where the reflection of the fires flickers across the surface. It looks almost as though the heavens themselves are being forged below. Somewhere in the city, a smith hammers one last time, sealing another blade, another tool, another promise into shape. You close your eyes and think. Kingdoms are built on fire and faith, but they endure because someone remembers how to keep both burning. The next day arrives wrapped in golden haze and the smell of baked clay. You wake to the sound of drums echoing through Meroe's streets, soft at first, then faster, brighter, announcing celebration. It's festival day, one of those moments when the entire kingdom exhales at once. Work pauses, trade slows, and even the furnaces rest. The Kandake herself has declared a feast of renewal, a time to honor the Nile, the gods, and the fragile magic of abundance. You join the procession as it winds through the city's wide avenue. The air is alive with color. Women in linen dyed crimson and lapis blue, men with painted faces and golden armlets, children scattering petals that cling to your sandals. Incense smoke curls upward, mingling with the dust. The queen rides at the center on a small chariot pulled by oxen with polished horns. Her robes light, her crown modest, gold and ivory woven together like sunlight captured in form. The drums shift rhythm. Slow, deliberate beats that make the ground itself hum. Behind you, a troupe of dancers moves in circular steps, echoing the cycles of flood and harvest. Their anklets jingle in perfect counterpoint to the drums. One of them laughs as she spins, a bright human sound in all this divine ceremony. Festivals like this aren't just for joy. They're social glue. The queen knows that for all her iron and treaties, it's these shared rhythms that hold her kingdom together. As the crowd sways and sings, you realize this isn't a performance for the gods. It's a rehearsal of unity. The procession halts at the riverbank, where priests have prepared offerings, baskets of dates, jugs of beer, small clay models of cattle, and a single jar of honey sealed with beeswax. The queen steps down, her bare feet sinking slightly into the mud. She lifts her hands toward the river, her voice carrying across the crowd. O great Hapi, giver of floods, lifter of hearts, you who renew the world each year, remember your children. Her words flow like the river itself, calm, assured, timeless. The priests echo her prayer, their voices layering until it becomes a song more felt than heard. Then, with slow ceremony, the offerings are lowered into the current. The crowd kneels. You hear the gentle splash, and for a heartbeat, the entire city seems to hold its breath. Historians still argue whether these rituals marked real hydrological predictions or symbolic blessings. But one thing's certain, they tied faith to nature in ways science still envies. The Nile's behavior wasn't random here. It was conversation. As the crowd disperses, laughter and music rise again. Vendors appear from nowhere, selling honey cakes, figs, and beer in small ceramic cups. Children chase one another between the stalls, their faces dusted with flour. The queen lingers, speaking to the priests, then turns to walk among her people. You follow her quietly. Wherever she goes, space opens and fills again, a tide of reverence and affection. A musician nearby strums a lyre and begins to sing. She rules not by blade, but by balance, not by fear, but by feast. Her crown shines brighter when the people eat. It's both praise and truth. The queen stops to listen, smiling faintly. When he finishes, she tosses him a silver ring. Sing again, she says, but louder next year. You drift deeper into the festival. The scent of roasted grain and beer fills the air. Women sit in circles, braiding each other's hair, laughing over stories of husbands and harvests. A group of young men wrestle in the dust, cheered on by a ring of children. Every corner holds motion, sound, and laughter. It feels like the city itself has come alive, and yet beneath the celebration, you sense something more, the steady heartbeat of governance disguised as joy. The queen's advisors mingle with the crowds, listening. What do the people say when they think no one powerful is near? Are they content? Fearful? Hopeful? Information flows best when wine does. Historians still debate whether these festivals were spontaneous or state-sponsored morale projects. The evidence, murals, hymns, surviving correspondence, suggests both. For every dance, there was an accounting scroll. For every prayer, a quiet report back to the palace. But to the people, it didn't matter. For one day, they ate their fill, sang without care, and believed the gods were near. As afternoon fades, you wander toward the shade of a tamarisk tree. From there, you watch the queen seated beside the river, her reflection shimmering on the water's surface. Children splash nearby, their laughter carried on the wind. She looks at them with a softness you haven't seen before. For a moment, she isn't ruler or symbol. She's just another human watching time flow by. The wind picks up slightly, lifting the scent of lotus from the water. The priests begin their closing hymn, slow, mournful, beautiful. The river sleeps and wakes again. So do we. Their voices blend with the steady rhythm of drums and the chirp of evening insects. You can almost feel the kingdom breathe with them, one vast organism, each part alive because it remembers it belongs to the whole. As twilight falls, the festival transforms into calm. Fires are lit along the riverbank, their flames flickering like stars fallen to earth. The queen rises once more, giving a final wave to her people before returning to the palace. You watch her silhouette against the violet sky, poised, still, luminous. The drums fade. The crowd disperses. Only the river keeps singing, whispering secrets to the reeds. You linger, unwilling to leave the peace of this moment. The air hums with warmth, the smell of earth and sweetness, the faint sound of distant laughter. Somewhere nearby, a small child hums the same hymn the priests sang, out of tune but sincere. You close your eyes. The rhythm of the Nile merges with your heartbeat. In this stillness, you understand what every Kandake must have known, that power isn't a thing you seize. It's a current you learn to flow with. The city sleeps in the hush after the festival. A faint sweetness still lingers in the air, burnt honey, smoke, and wet soil from where the offerings entered the river. But inside the palace, light glows from behind shuttered windows. The queen has not gone to rest. Tonight, power turns inward. Tonight, the work begins again. You slip through a corridor lined with oil lamps, their flames trembling in the draft. The walls bear reliefs of past Kandakes, women holding scepters, lions, or scrolls, each carved with the same serene confidence. Ahead, faint voices echo. The council is meeting. In Kush, decisions aren't shouted from thrones. They're whispered across tables. You enter the hall quietly. It's smaller than you expected, almost intimate. The floor is covered in woven mats, the air heavy with frankincense. Around the low table sit 7 figures. The queen's advisors, priests, generals, and one woman whose ink-stained fingers mark her as a scribe. They lean close, speaking softly enough that even secrets seem to move gently here. The queen sits at the head, no crown tonight, her hair braided simply. She listens more than she speaks, her fingers tracing the rim of a bronze cup. Every few moments, she lifts her eyes, and the room stills. A general is the first to speak. The Roman envoys have crossed us one, he says. His voice is calm, but the word Rome always hangs heavy. They bring gifts and perhaps demands. The priest beside him frowns. Rome always brings both. The queen doesn't interrupt. She waits until the murmurs die down, then asks, "How many soldiers are with them?" "Not an army," the general says, "but enough to remind us of one." A small smile tugs at her lips. "Then let them remember we are not a province." Historians still argue about the nature of Kush's relationship with Rome after Egypt fell under its control. Some call it resistance, others call it negotiation by brilliance. Whatever the label, it's clear from the chronicles that the Kandake of this era, Amanirenas, played the game with astonishing precision. The scribe clears her throat softly, reading from a tablet. Reports from Napata say Roman merchants complain of tariffs on their goods. They threaten to take their trade elsewhere. The queen leans back. "Elsewhere," she repeats, almost amused. "Let them find a river kinder than ours if they can." The room chuckles quietly. She gestures for the priest to speak. "And what of the omens?" "The eclipse still favors caution," he replies. "But the ibis has nested early. That may signal fortune." The queen tilts her head. "Then we'll be cautious in our fortune." The conversation turns practical. Taxes, harvest projections, fortification repairs. The scribe notes everything with fluid strokes of ink, her hand steady despite the flickering lamplight. You realize how much of history was written like this. One tired scribe, one soft voice, one queen deciding how the next 100 years would unfold. When the talk turns to justice, a local magistrate is summoned. He bows deeply before speaking. A merchant in the lower district was caught watering his beer. The people ask for punishment. The room waits. The priest suggests fines. The general mutters about example setting. The queen holds up a hand. "Let him drink it," she says simply. The scribe looks up, surprised. "All of it?" "All of it," she repeats. "And then let him rest until he swears to sell truth next time." The room dissolves into quiet laughter. Even governance here has humor. Historians often underestimate that, the laughter behind the law, the wit inside power. But the Kandake's understood balance. Severity earns fear. Humor earns loyalty. Later, when the council ends, the queen dismisses everyone except her scribe. The others bow and leave silently. The 2 women remain, surrounded by the soft crackle of oil lamps. The queen removes her earrings, sets them on the table. "Do you ever grow tired?" she asks suddenly, "of writing words that outlive their meaning?" The scribe hesitates, unsure if it's a trick. "No, Majesty." Meaning changes, but the words remind us it was once understood. The queen studies her for a long moment. "Then keep writing. Someday they'll try to read us. Let them work for it. You can't help but smile." That line, centuries later, will prove prophetic. The Meroitic script, partially decoded, forever whispering its secrets just out of reach. When the scribe departs, the queen remains alone. She walks to the balcony overlooking the dark courtyard. The fires from the furnaces still glow faintly on the horizon. Somewhere, dogs bark. Somewhere farther, drums echo from the riverbanks. She stands quietly, hands resting on the stone railing, and exhales. The weight of her world, armies, harvests, gods, trade routes, presses invisibly on her shoulders. But she bears it the way she bears everything, elegantly, deliberately, without hurry. You stand beside her in silence. The moonlight softens her features, catching the faint gold in her hair braid. For a moment she looks like one of the temple reliefs, half divine, half weary. Below, a servant lights another torch. The flicker dances across the wall, illuminating a carving of a lion. the same symbol the queen wore on her signet ring. You remember what it means in Kushite tradition, strength that protects, not devours. She touches the carving briefly before turning away. Tomorrow, she murmurs almost to herself, they'll bring news from the border. Then, with a faint, tired smile, she adds, and I'll bring patience. You watch her walk down the corridor until she vanishes into shadow. The lamps flicker. The city exhales and night closes gently over Meroe again. Outside, the Nile keeps whispering, never loud, never still, like history itself, flowing onward no matter who sits at its banks. The following morning dawns sharper than usual, the sky burnished copper, the air thick with anticipation. You sense it before anyone speaks. Something is stirring beyond the borders of the kingdom. Messengers ride hard through the gates, their horses lathered and dusty. One dismounts so fast he nearly stumbles, thrusting a sealed tablet into a guard's hand. It bears the unmistakable stamp of Roman wax, imposing, foreign, and faintly arrogant. You follow the messenger through the palace corridors, where the air smells of sand, sweat, and freshly extinguished torches. Inside the council chamber, the queen waits already, poised in a simple linen robe. No jewelry today, no crown, just quiet readiness. The tablet is presented. She breaks the seal with her thumb, unfolds the thin sheet of parchment, and reads. You watch her eyes move left to right, slow, deliberate. Her expression doesn't change. When she's done, she passes the letter to her scribe, who reads it aloud for the others. To the ruler of Meroe, known to us as the Queen of Kush, it begins. Rome acknowledges your kingdom's proximity to our southern frontier and requests assurance that your people will refrain from disturbing trade along the Nile. In exchange, the emperor offers goodwill and continued commerce. The scribe pauses. You can hear the tension in her breath. There's more, she says. They also propose a mutual understanding regarding tribute. The word tribute hangs in the air like smoke. The general shifts in his seat. The priest frowns. You notice a faint glimmer in the queen's eye, not fear but amusement. Tribute, she repeats softly, tasting the word. They offer goodwill and ask for obedience. How Roman. She rises, moves toward the open window and gazes out over the city. From here, Meroe gleams alive and sovereign, furnaces glowing, market stalls opening, the Nile glinting beyond. They mistake courtesy for weakness, she says. That's their first error. Historians still debate what truly triggered the conflict between Kush and Rome around this time. Some say it was trade tariffs, others claim border skirmishes. But standing here, watching the queen weigh her words, you realize it may have been something simpler. Rome's inability to understand a power that didn't kneel. The general clears his throat. Shall we respond, Majesty? Yes, she says. With diplomacy first, always diplomacy first. But let them feel we've read their message twice. A scribe prepares parchment, dipping her reed pen into ink. The queen dictates slowly. To the governor of Egypt, servant of Caesar, she begins. Kush honors peace as long as peace is mutual. We guard our waters as Rome guards hers. We trade not in submission but in trust. Let our merchants prosper as equals, not subjects. Her tone is calm, her phrasing perfect, neither defiant nor deferential. The scribe writes fast, her hand steady despite the heat. When she finishes, the queen adds one final line herself. If friendship depends on tribute, then perhaps friendship is not what you seek. She seals it with the royal lion insignia. The messenger bows low, tucking the letter into his satchel before departing north. After he leaves, the room exhales. The priest murmurs something about patience. The general grumbles about readiness. The queen simply says, both. You step out into the courtyard with her later, where the sound of hammers from the distant forges punctuates the morning. She stops beside a tree heavy with dates, plucks one, and holds it up to the light. Rome, she says quietly, is like this fruit. Bright, sweet, and quick to rot in the sun. Historians still argue whether she truly expected war or merely prepared for one out of habit. But in her stillness, you sense calculation, a ruler who knows the cost of both peace and defiance. That afternoon, she meets with her generals again. They spread maps across a wooden table, rough sketches of river bends, fortresses, supply routes. Small figurines mark troops and garrisons. The queen traces one finger along the Nile. If they advance, she says, it will be along this corridor. The river gives life, but it also traps them. They cannot fight without it. A young officer, nervous but eager, asks, "And what will we do?" Her answer is immediate. "What we've always done." We watch, we wait, we strike where they least expect. Evening falls. The palace glows gold against the fading sky. Couriers gallop through the gates, carrying her message north. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Roman commanders read it by lamplight, their brows furrowed, uncertain whether it's a promise or a threat. The queen, meanwhile, walks to the roof of her palace. From up here, the land stretches vast and silent, the dark ribbon of the Nile, the flickering dots of campfires, the faint shimmer of the desert beyond. She stands there long after the others retire, her hand resting lightly on the railing. The breeze tugs at her robe, carrying the faint scent of iron smoke and lotus blossoms. You stand beside her again, the silence thick between you. Finally, she says softly, "They'll test us soon." You ask, "Do you fear them?" She smiles, small, knowing. "No, Rome believes power only travels north to south. They forget the river flows both ways." It's a statement so simple yet so devastatingly precise that you almost laugh. The Nile, always their teacher, has given her the perfect metaphor. Power, like water, obeys no border. Below, the furnaces hiss as iron cools. Somewhere distant, a single drumbeat echoes from the city's edge, a signal, a rhythm, or maybe just a reminder that Kush never sleeps. The queen turns toward the horizon, her eyes on the fading line of the river. "If war comes," she murmurs, "we'll greet it as we greet the flood, carefully. And together, you can't help but think that even Rome, with all its legions and laurels, might one day envy that kind of calm. The morning that follows is too quiet, the kind of stillness that carries weight. The sky burns white, no clouds, no wind, just the hum of waiting. You feel it in the air, in the markets, even among the animals that pace restlessly along the riverbanks. Somewhere beyond the northern border, Rome is moving. The first messenger arrives before dawn. His horse collapses the moment he dismounts, foam streaking its neck. He kneels before the palace gate, breathless, eyes wide with exhaustion. "They've crossed Aswan," he gasps. Roman banners, red as fire. Word spreads faster than sound. By midday, Meroe knows. Traders whisper in alleys. Soldiers tighten their grips on spears. Mothers draw their children closer. Yet the queen, the Kandake Amanirenas herself, remains unshaken. She convenes her council before the sun reaches its peak, every motion deliberate, measured. Inside the hall, the air feels thicker than the incense burning. The generals stand in full armor, the priests in linen, the scribes poised with ink, ready to record history's next heartbeat. "They come," the general says, his voice clipped, "with perhaps 5,000 men, led by a governor who believes the gods have never set foot south of Egypt." The queen leans back in her chair. "Then we'll remind him that the gods travel." There's laughter, nervous but real. It cuts the tension just enough for everyone to breathe. She rises, gestures to the map laid before her, a rough outline of the Nile's curve. "If they take Napata, they'll think we'll fight them head on. We won't. Let them burn what's already ash. We'll draw them south, into the heat, into the waiting." Historians still argue whether this plan was premeditated or born from instinct. What's certain is that her strategy would echo through centuries. Retreat not from fear, but from patience. That night, the city prepares. The streets flicker with torchlight. The clang of metal fills the air as smiths work through the hours, forging arrowheads and spear tips. You can taste iron on the wind. Women gather grain and water, moving supplies into hidden storage. Children are sent inland, their laughter replaced by the heavy silence of adults who understand too much. The queen herself walks the armory, inspecting each rank of soldiers. Their armor glints bronze in the torchlight, faces streaked with ochre to dull reflection. When she passes, they bow, not in ritual, but in quiet devotion. She stops beside a young archer, no older than 20. His hand shakes slightly as he kneels. She sets a hand on his shoulder. "Courage," she says softly, "is quieter than shouting." "Remember that," he nods, swallowing hard. That single moment, gentle, unrecorded, will ripple through legend long after the battle fades. You follow her outside as she mounts her chariot. The wheels creak, the horses snort, and her cloak flares like smoke in the torchlight. The generals ride beside her, a living wave of resolve. The army moves north, silent but for the rhythm of hooves and drums that beat low and steady. The desert swallows sound quickly, leaving only the pulse of movement, the whisper of sand, the distant murmur of the river. The queen doesn't speak for hours. She watches the horizon, where the red of Roman banners might already stain the sky. When they reach Napata 2 days later, the air smells of smoke. The once proud city, temples, markets, gardens, lies blackened. Statues toppled, walls shattered, sacred idols stolen or defaced. Rome has left its message in ashes. The soldiers murmur, fists tightening around weapons. The queen dismounts, walks barefoot across the ruins. She kneels, scoops a handful of soot, lets it fall through her fingers. They think destruction ends a story, she says quietly. They forget fire feeds the next chapter. Historians still debate what happened next. Some claim she ordered a counterattack that struck Aswan itself. Others say she waited, drawing the Romans deeper into hostile ground. What's certain is that Rome didn't expect what came. That night, the Kushite army vanished into the desert, not in retreat, but in disappearance. The Romans advanced south, confident, arrogant. Then the dunes moved. Hidden archers, cavalry from nowhere, heat that melted armor, terrain that swallowed formations whole. Every battle report Rome sent afterward reads like confusion disguised as formality. They couldn't understand how an army without roads or maps fought like smoke. You can almost see it. The Romans sweating under bronze helmets, the desert humming like a furnace, the sound of arrows slicing through air, and at the center of it all, the queen in her chariot. Her bow drawn steady, her voice calm amid chaos. One Roman historian, Strabo, centuries later, would write grudgingly of a one-eyed woman leading an army against Augustus's men. Scholars still argue whether that was Amanirenas herself, injured in battle, or a poetic embellishment. But the image remains unforgettable. A queen scarred, fierce, unbent. The embodiment of defiance turned human. The battle stretches through days, each one hotter than the last. Rome takes territory and loses it by dusk. Ambushes in reeds, traps in narrow valleys, illusions in mirage and light. The Nile runs quietly through it all, impartial as time. Finally, the Romans withdraw to regroup, battered and bewildered. The Kandake does not chase them. She watches from the cliffs above, wind tugging her cloak, eyes sharp as obsidian. They'll return, she says. And when they do, we'll talk. When the army marches home, the people meet them, not with shouting, but with song, low, rhythmic, reverent. Victory isn't declared. It's breathed. The queen rides through the gates of Meroe, dust covering her armor, her expression unreadable. She doesn't smile, but when she looks up at the sky, at the smoke clearing in the distance, you see a flicker of satisfaction. Historians still puzzle over why she chose diplomacy after triumph, sending envoys instead of soldiers, negotiating peace instead of pressing advantage. But you suspect it's simple. She fought not to conquer, but to remind the world where her borders ended and her patience began. That night, as the fires die and the stars settle back into the sky, you walk through Meroe's quiet streets. The air smells of dust, sweat, and faint incense. You hear distant laughter, small, cautious, but real. You stop at the temple steps. A priest kneels beside the new altar stone, whispering prayers for the dead. He notices you and murmurs, "The gods protect those who protect themselves." You look out toward the horizon, north, where Rome still glimmers faintly in memory, and think, sometimes the softest empires are the hardest to conquer. And somewhere, far from here, a Roman governor sits in his tent, nursing bruised pride and wondering how an empire that spans the world just lost to the rhythm of a river and the patience of a queen. The air in Meroe is heavy with the scent of iron and wet dust, the smell of victory quietly cooling. A few days have passed since the last Roman banner vanished northward, swallowed by the horizon. The furnaces burn again, but softer now, less frantic, as though even the fire is exhaling. You walk through the palace courtyard where fresh garlands of palm leaves hang from the columns, not as trophies, but as offerings of endurance. No trumpets blare, no grand proclamations echo through the streets. The Kandake, ever steady, has no need for spectacle. She simply resumes her routine, council meetings, temple offerings, the slow pulse of governance. But beneath the calm, there's movement. Messengers come and go, couriers ride by night, scribes work by lamplight. The ink still smells sharp, the paper still damp with purpose. In the council chamber, the mood is cautious relief. The generals speak in low tones. Rome has retreated, one says, but their pride has not. Another adds, they will want a treaty, something that makes defeat sound like victory. The queen listens, head slightly tilted as if she's already seen the letter they haven't yet received. Let them write it, she says. We'll correct the grammar. You can't help smiling at the dryness in her tone. That's the thing about Amanirenas. She wins as gracefully as she fights. Historians still argue over the details of what came next. The negotiations between Kush and Rome that led to one of the most balanced treaties of antiquity. No tribute, no subjugation, no humiliation. Only trade restored, borders agreed upon, and respect quietly exchanged. Even Augustus, for all his marble grandeur, would later remove the image of her army from his temple wall. A silent acknowledgement, perhaps, that Kush had earned parity. But before the treaties are signed, there's one more journey to make. One final act that transforms war into wisdom. You follow the queen and her envoys as they prepare to travel north, not as conquerors, but as equals. The caravan is smaller this time. No chariots, no fanfare, just a handful of diplomats, soldiers, and priests carrying olive branches and scrolls. The queen's armor is replaced by a robe of soft linen, white as the morning fog. Around her neck, she wears a single amulet, the lion's head of Sekhmet, goddess of power tempered by mercy. As the sun rises, the procession moves through the city gates. The people line the streets in silence, not out of fear, but reverence. They've learned that true victory doesn't need to shout. A child tosses a handful of grain at the queen's feet, a blessing for safety. She smiles, touches the child's head gently, then continues onward. The road north is long and quiet. The air grows cooler, the light harder, more foreign. You pass abandoned forts still marked with Roman insignia, half buried in sand. Time will devour them soon enough. The queen doesn't glance at them. Her gaze stays fixed on the river, as if following a conversation only she can hear. After several days, the delegation reaches Qasr Ibrahim, the border fortress where the Roman governor waits. The structure looms above the Nile, its sandstone walls casting long shadows. Soldiers stand stiff at the gates, unsure how to greet the woman who'd recently burned their banners and humbled their empire. She spares them the trouble. Dismounting, she walks forward slowly, each step deliberate. The Roman general steps out to meet her, a man of rank and caution, his face unreadable. He bows slightly, more from practicality than reverence. "Queen of Kush," he says in accented tone. "Rome greets you in peace." She inclines her head. Then peace has already begun. Inside, the negotiations unfold with a rhythm that's almost musical. Translators murmur back and forth, scrolls are unrolled, seals pressed, every word balanced like a blade on air. The Romans speak of stability, trade, and friendship. The Kushites speak of equality, distance, and dignity. At one point, a Roman envoy suggests a small annual gift to symbolize mutual respect, a thinly disguised tribute. The queen's eyebrow lifts ever so slightly. "Respect," she says, "does not charge interest." The room falls silent. Even the translator hesitates before rendering her words into Latin. Historians still debate the exact terms agreed upon that day, but records show that Rome eventually conceded. The border was fixed at the First Cataract, trade reopened, and all mention of tribute quietly erased. For the first time in memory, an African queen had negotiated peace with the greatest empire of the age, and done it without losing an inch of land. As the sun lowers over the river, both delegations share a final meal. Bread, fish, dates, wine, simple, symbolic. You notice the Roman general relax, almost smiling. "Your people fight fiercely," he says, raising his cup. "If Rome had such discipline, we might rest easier." The queen nods, eyes glinting. "Then you understand our peace," she replies. That night, as the camp settles, you find her standing at the riverbank again. The moonlight paints the water silver. She holds a reed pen in one hand, idly tracing lines in the sand. You glance down and see what she's drawn. Not a map, not words, but waves. Endless waves flowing north and south, looping endlessly back to the same point. She notices you watching. "The river doesn't conquer," she says softly. "It just moves until everything bends with it." You ask if she thinks Rome will honor the peace. She smiles faintly. Rome honors only what it fears, and it will remember this. When the caravan returns to Meroe, the city greets them with quiet pride. The smiths ring their hammers in rhythm, the markets open with laughter, the temples fill with incense once more. Life, patient and unbroken, resumes its steady song. A tablet is placed in the palace archives, the official treaty between Kush and Rome, sealed in both languages. The queen signs her name in the looping strokes of Meroitic script. The ink glistens, then dries, locking her defiance into history. Outside, the sun sets red and heavy. The Nile glows like liquid bronze. You stand on the balcony beside her one last time, the air warm and still. They'll write their histories, she says, almost smiling. But the river will remember ours. And as the light fades, you realize she's right. Empires rise, conquer, and fall, but the water keeps flowing, carrying her name farther than any Roman monument ever will. The next weeks move gently, like the slow turn of the Nile itself. Meroe exhales after years of tension. The clang of weapons gives way to the rhythm of looms, hammers shaping not swords but ornaments again. The city smells of oil, clay, and baked bread. For the first time in months, you can hear laughter spilling from the markets without the undertone of worry. The Kandake walks through the streets without escort, a rare gesture of peace in itself. Children chase her shadow. Merchants bow, some awkwardly, unsure if they should kneel or grin. She chooses for them, a small smile, a nod. It's enough. Historians still debate whether this period marked the beginning of Meroe's cultural peak. But if you could bottle this atmosphere, the mingled scents of papyrus, incense, and smoke, the hum of a city rebuilt by pride, you'd know greatness doesn't always need marble or empire. Sometimes it's the quiet after a storm. That afternoon she visits the royal forge. Sparks bloom in the dim light, each one a flicker of life. A blacksmith bows deeply. "Majesty," he says, "the war gave us new metal. We learned from their weapons." He holds up a blade. Roman design, Kushite refinement. The steel hums low. "We'll use it for plowshares now." The queen nods, touches the metal's edge. "War teaches, even when it fails to conquer," she says. "Keep its lesson sharp, not its wound." You feel something shift in the air, a kind of peace that doesn't erase memory, but integrates it. Later, she meets her scribes in the library courtyard. Palm shadows dance across the walls, and reed pens scratch softly over parchment. The language they write, Meroitic, is still mysterious even to modern scholars. Its looping, elegant forms feel like river currents frozen in ink. The queen sits beside them, dictating new decrees for education, trade, temple restoration. At one point, she pauses and says, "Record not just what we build, but what we refuse to forget." A scribe looks up. "What shall we refuse to forget, Majesty?" "That we didn't bow," she replies simply. Historians still argue whether this line ever made it to inscription. But it lingers in oral tradition, passed down through centuries of Nubian song and poetry, proof that sometimes memory itself is a monument. In the evenings, the palace fills with music again. Harps, drums, the soft rattle of sistrums, sounds that had gone silent through months of vigilance. You find yourself in the courtyard with the queen as musicians play under oil lamps. The flickering light paints the walls gold and amber. She closes her eyes, just listening, the rhythm pulling her posture into stillness. "You ever notice," she says after a while, "how victory sounds quieter than triumph?" You nod, though she isn't really asking. She's thinking out loud, a habit of rulers who carry history in their bones. From somewhere beyond the palace walls, a chorus of women sings. Their song is low, repetitive, meditative, part hymn, part lullaby. You can make out only fragments: river eternal, queen unbent, gold of the sun, voice of the lioness. The queen listens a long time before whispering, "That's worth more than Rome's marble." There's laughter again in the air, the light kind that heals. A child stumbles into the courtyard, chasing a stray cat, and one of the guards actually sets down his spear to help. You realize then, peace has returned not as silence, but as laughter permitted again. Over the following days, the queen dedicates herself to diplomacy. Envoys from neighboring Nubian cities arrive: Kerma, Kyrgyz, Napata, each bearing gifts of ivory, salt, and incense. She greets them all personally, turning formalities into friendships. She insists on shared meals rather than councils, laughter instead of protocol. Alliances, she says with a smirk, digest better over bread than scrolls. It works. By the time they leave, trade routes that had fractured during the war are mended again. Caravan bells echo through the desert, carrying spices, papyrus, and tales of a queen who faced Caesar's legions and didn't flinch. One night, during a small gathering in the palace garden, a poet reads aloud from a fresh tablet. His voice quivers as he recites. She stood where the river narrows, and the sun bowed its face. Even lions bent the knee, for her courage left no trace of fear, the queen chuckles. He's exaggerating, she murmurs to you. I do remember being afraid. I just didn't have time to act on it. The court laughs, not mockingly, but in admiration. Even heroes, it seems, can tease their legends. Historians still debate how deeply her reign influenced the later queens of Kush. But you can see her imprint everywhere, in trade records, in architecture, in the subtle evolution of diplomacy that prioritized endurance over dominance. You accompany her one last time to the Temple of Amun, where offerings are being renewed. The air inside is cool, perfumed with lotus oil. She kneels before the altar, her hand brushing the carved symbols of gods and ancestors. We did not conquer Rome, she murmurs, but we taught them where to stop. That's enough. Outside, the sun dips low, turning the sky into molten amber. You follow her up the temple steps, where she pauses to look over the city one more time. Meroa sprawls below like a living mosaic, golden rooftops, flickering hearths, smoke rising gently from the forges. She turns to you and says softly, empires die of exhaustion. But dignity, if you feed it daily, outlives them all. You don't know whether she means for you to remember that line, but you do. It stays with you long after dusk, long after the drums fade and the stars settle into the river's reflection. Somewhere, perhaps in Rome itself, a scribe writes the same history from the opposite side, a sanitized version of conquest, maybe where victories are measured only by spoils. But here, in the soft warmth of Kushite night, you understand the truth. Survival, written in quiet ink, is its own kind of empire. The queen retreats to her chambers. The lamps dim one by one, and you sit on the steps of the temple, the marble still warm from her touch, listening to the whisper of the Nile carrying her story downstream into forever. The next morning arrives wrapped in mist. The Nile gleams like silver cloth beneath a pale sun. You stand on the palace terrace with the queen, watching steam rise from the water as if the river itself is sighing in relief. The world feels reborn, and for once no banners, no drums, no messengers break the stillness. Just the rhythmic chirping of birds and the faint clink of pottery from the kitchens below. A servant offers the Kandake a cup of date-sweetened tea. She accepts it, inhaling the aroma before taking a slow sip. Strange, she says, how peace feels heavier than war. Maybe because we have to hold it carefully. You smile. She's right, of course. War sharpens people. Peace requires patience. And patience, as history keeps proving, is far rarer. By mid-morning, the queen calls her council again. This time, not for strategy or defense, but to plan reconstruction. The generals look slightly awkward without armor, their hands twitching toward absent swords. The scholars, in contrast, seem alive again, eager to unroll scrolls and maps. We will rebuild Napata, she declares, voice calm but resolute, not as a monument to loss, but as proof of what survives. The architect, an older man with ink-stained fingers, hesitates. Majesty, should we restore the old temples or build anew? The queen glances toward the horizon. Both, she says. Let the ruins remind us what arrogance burns. Let the new stones remind us how humility builds. Historians still debate whether this decision marked a cultural renaissance or a quiet political maneuver to unify the kingdoms north and south. Either way, the rebuilding of Napata would soon become a symbol of recovery. A city born twice, first from ambition, then from resilience. A few weeks later, you travel with her to the northern frontier. The landscape shifts subtly. The desert flattens, the wind sharpens, the scent of the river thins. What was once a battlefield is now a construction site. Columns rise from the sand like bones of a sleeping giant. Workers hum songs as they haul sandstone blocks, their rhythm guided by drums. The queen moves among them with ease. No throne, no canopy, just a linen veil and a walking staff carved with lion motifs. When one worker's rope snaps, nearly dropping a block, she kneels beside him to help retie it. The man stammers apologies, but she waves him off with a smile. "The gods don't measure rulers by how clean their hands are," she says. You watch her inspect the foundation stones, her fingers tracing the hieroglyphs, pausing at a carving of a moon Ra. "He's been through this before," she muses. "Empires fall, gods stay calm." That night, a bonfire crackles in the half-built square. Builders, soldiers, and scribes gather, sharing roasted grain and honeyed beer. The air hums with warmth, the kind that doesn't need celebration to feel whole. The queen sits with them, cross-legged, her laughter quiet but contagious. Someone plays a reed flute, its sound drifting over the dunes. You close your eyes and let it carry you. The melody feels ancient, looping endlessly like the Nile itself. She tells a story then, not of conquest or gods, but of her childhood. "When I was a girl," she begins, "my mother taught me that diplomacy starts in the kitchen. She said, if you can make a guest forget they're hungry, you can make them forget they're angry." The crowd chuckles softly. "So," she continues, "I suppose I've just spent years trying to keep an empire full." Even the generals laugh at that. It's strange and beautiful to watch. Soldiers and artisans sharing jokes under starlight. No rank, no fear. You realize, maybe for the first time, that this is what survival looks like. Shared humor after shared danger. Historians still argue whether Amanirenas' strength came from strategy or empathy. But sitting here, with her knee-deep in dust, surrounded by workers who die for her without being asked, you think the answer is simpler. She never separated leadership from humanity. Days pass. The temple columns rise higher. Sculptors carve her likeness into stone, not as a warrior, but as a calm figure seated beside lions. Her crown gleams with simplicity, her expression serene but watchful. "When you mention the likeness," she smirks. "Too kind," she says. They forgot the wrinkles. By late afternoon, a storm rolls across the desert. Wind, sand, flashes of distant lightning. Workers scramble to cover their tools. You and the queen take shelter inside the half-built temple. Rain begins to fall, rare, heavy, warm. The drops drum against the stone, a rhythm older than language. For a long moment, she says nothing. Then softly, "This is how peace sounds. Not silent, not still, but alive." When the storm passes, the air smells of wet clay and rebirth. The sand glitters with tiny reflections of starlight. You look toward the river, swollen, churning, purposeful, and it strikes you how it mirrors her reign. Fierce, flexible, unending. As the builders resume work, one young boy approaches the queen. He offers her a piece of pottery he's shaped himself, rough, uneven, but marked with care. "For your table, my queen," he murmurs. She accepts it with a genuine smile. "It will remind me to stay humble," she says, "and to keep both hands busy." Back in Meroe, word spreads quickly about her visit. The artisans carve new designs, blending Roman techniques with Nubian patterns. Spirals, lotus petals, lions in motion. The art of the era begins to evolve, not through imitation but adaptation. It's said the queen encouraged this fusion deliberately, believing that influence wasn't a threat. It was a conversation. As you wander the markets one evening, you see proof everywhere. Jewelry shaped in Roman molds but etched with Nubian prayers. Pottery painted with both Latin and Meroitic symbols. It's like watching two worlds shake hands across a table, and you realize that's the Kandake's true genius. Not just winning wars, but turning enemies into teachers and lessons into legacy. As dusk falls, you return to the palace. The queen stands by the window, gazing toward the distant glow of Napata's fires, the new city rising. Her voice drifts softly, almost to herself. Empires burn bright, but wisdom smolders longer. And with that, she extinguishes the lamp beside her, letting the moonlight paint her face silver and serene. The next morning opens like a soft page being turned. The first rays of sunlight creep over the palace walls, brushing across murals that have seen 3 generations of rulers. You rise before the queen does, stepping into the courtyard where dew pearls on the leaves of the lotus ponds. Somewhere beyond the city, hammers still echo from Napata's reconstruction, faint but steady, a heartbeat of stone and effort. The queen joins you a few minutes later. already dressed in a simple linen robe, her hair braided in a tight crown. "You're awake early," she says, her tone half amused. "Couldn't sleep, you admit." She smiles faintly. That's how empires start. One restless person at dawn. She isn't wrong. Breakfast is light. Bread, honey, figs, and a thick drink of barley and milk. She eats slowly, methodically, her mind elsewhere. When she finally speaks, her voice is thoughtful. "Rebuilding cities is easy," she says. Rebuilding trust takes longer. You know she's thinking of the borderlands, the villages caught between Kush and Egypt, where Roman influence lingers like a stubborn shadow. Traders there still whisper Roman prices. Priests still wear Roman ornaments. The queen plans to visit them soon, not with soldiers, but with gifts and stories. By midday, the royal caravan sets out again. The desert heat shimmers, rippling like silk over the dunes. The road north is lined with acacia trees whose twisted shapes resemble hands reaching for the sky. You can smell the sand, dry and metallic, mixed with the faint sweetness of date groves. As the caravan rolls forward, she speaks softly to her scribe. "Record today's journey, but don't write about me. Write about the people who wave as we pass." The scribe nods, his reed pen scratching the scroll in rhythm with the hooves. You glance at the villagers who stand along the roadside, women carrying baskets of fruit, children holding carved wooden animals, old men leaning on staffs. They bow slightly, but it feels more like respect than ritual. At one stop, a group of children offers her a woven mat dyed in deep indigo. The pattern is geometric, intricate, unlike any design from the capital. "From our mothers," the eldest says shyly. The queen kneels, spreads the mat across the sand, and studies it carefully. "Tell your mothers," she says, "this is how kingdoms talk, not with gold, but with hands." Historians still argue whether these small gestures of connection helped unify the outlying provinces more effectively than any military campaign. What's certain is that within a few years, trade routes once patrolled by soldiers were instead maintained by merchants and pilgrims. Peace, once fragile, began to feel like habit. As night falls, the caravan halts near a small oasis. The air cools, the stars appear in sheets. The queen sits by the fire with her guards and begins to tell a story. Not of Kush, but of an older time. "There was once a woman," she says, "who wished to measure the wind. She built towers of feathers and sand to catch it. Each day she wrote how it moved, its sound, its scent, its touch. When she died, her journals were lost, but her towers remained. And so the wind still sings through them." You ask quietly, "Was she real?" The queen smiles. "Maybe, but real or not, she understood something. You can't own power. You can only understand its rhythm." Historians still debate whether that parable refers to her philosophy of governance, flexible, intuitive, guided by observation rather than domination. Whatever the meaning, it lingers in the night air like incense. As you lie awake later, the desert whispers, not with menace, but with memory. The sound of distant hyenas blends with the rustle of palm fronds. The stars are so clear they look carved. You can almost imagine ancient caravans still moving across the horizon, carrying stories instead of goods. At dawn, you're awakened by laughter. The queen is already up, sitting among the villagers who've gathered to see her off. She's trying, and failing, to milk a goat. The crowd howls with delight as the animal stubbornly turns its head. The queen laughs too, her composure gone, her hands wet. "See?" she says. "Even queens can't negotiate with goats. You've never seen her more human. The most powerful woman in Africa." Hands slick with goat's milk, laughing in the sand. Later, when the caravan departs, the villagers line the road again, waving palm leaves and calling blessings. One old woman shouts, "May your reign be long as the river." The queen turns, cups her hands around her mouth and answers, "And may your laughter reach the gods first." You travel for several more days, visiting settlements along the Nile. Each stop follows the same rhythm: greetings, gifts, laughter, and shared meals. She listens more than she speaks, asking farmers about floods, merchants about trade, women about family. When a fisherman complains of taxes, she doesn't scold. She takes notes. At one point, she gestures toward the Nile and says to you, "Governance is like this river. It bends around obstacles instead of crushing them. That's how it keeps moving." By the time you return to Meroe, the city seems lighter, cleaner, alive in new ways. Market stalls spill over with goods. ivory combs, copper jewelry, woven cloth from the south. Musicians play in corners. Travelers tell stories of the one-eyed queen who made Rome blink. You notice murals being painted on the temple walls, scenes of daily life, not battle. A woman grinding grain, a boy leading cattle, a potter shaping clay. Life as the new mythology. The queen stands watching them one afternoon, arms crossed loosely. "This," she murmurs, "is what we fought for. The right to be ordinary again." There's something deeply moving about that. The idea that peace isn't grand, it's mundane. It's the freedom to wake up, make bread, and not look over your shoulder. Later that evening, you find her on the palace balcony again, writing by lamplight. The air smells of jasmine and rain on dust. "Letters to Rome?" you ask. She smiles. "No, letters to tomorrow." She blows gently on the ink to dry it. The flame flickers, and for a moment her shadow stretches long across the marble, steady, graceful, unbroken. The days turn warmer as the harvest approaches. Meroa hums like a hive, alive with industry and calm. You can hear the rhythm of mallets from dawn till dusk, the distant calls of herders driving cattle, and the chatter of children splashing in irrigation canals. It feels like the entire kingdom has exhaled after years of holding its breath. The Kandake, though, seems to sleep less. Every morning before sunrise, she's already pacing the upper terrace, gazing out over the river's glittering curve. Sometimes she dictates letters to her scribe, other times she sketches rough plans, temples, gardens, docks. "A queen," she says once, "should plant enough trees to cast shade over the next ruler." Today, her attention is fixed on the dockyards. Barges crowd the shoreline, loaded with grain, papyrus, and copper ore from the southern mines. Workers move like ants, efficient and coordinated. The smell of wet rope, wood pitch, and Nile mud thickens the air. She watches silently for a while, then says, "Trade builds faster than conquest ever could." You nod. It's true. Since the peace with Rome, foreign merchants have returned. Egyptians, Greeks, even a few Syrians. They arrive wary, but leave impressed. Kushite markets now stretch from the desert edge to the delta, buzzing with languages and spices you've never heard before. At one stall, a trader from Alexandria displays small glass bottles, translucent, tinted with faint blues and greens. The queen picks one up, turns it in her hand, watching how it catches the light. "Glass," she murmurs. "It's like frozen river water." The merchant grins nervously. "Very popular in Rome, Majesty. Fit for emperors," she smiles faintly. "Then perhaps it will do for queens as well." Historians still debate whether Amanirenas truly encouraged foreign trade or whether it blossomed naturally from post-war stability. But either way, Meroa begins to shine again. Not as a rival to Rome, but as a partner in a strange, delicate dance, one built on shared profit rather than pride. That afternoon, the queen visits the workshops behind the palace. Artisans there are experimenting with new techniques, blending imported dyes with local minerals, inlaying jewelry with shells and tiny glass beads. The air smells of molten bronze and beeswax. One craftsman shows her a necklace shaped like a coiled serpent, each scale carved in minute detail. "Too fine for my neck," she jokes. "But perfect for histories," the craftsman bows, grinning wide. You can see it in his eyes. This isn't just admiration, it's belonging. The queen pauses beside a weaver whose loom clacks rhythmically. Threads of indigo, saffron, and cream ripple under her hands like captured sunlight. "These patterns," the queen says softly, "they remind me of our songs. The ones that never end, just change verses." The woman smiles. "Songs fade, Majesty, but cloth remembers." Outside, the city pulses with the scent of spice and dust. The royal scribes have begun cataloging exports: gold, ivory, ostrich feathers, incense, even exotic animals. Somewhere, an elephant trumpets impatiently near the docks, startling a flock of birds into the sky. You and the queen both laugh. "Even the elephants want attention," she says. "Let's give them better roads." And she does, ordering repairs to the trade routes stretching east toward the Red Sea. It's a massive undertaking, involving hundreds of workers and engineers. Yet she oversees it with almost meditative calm, often walking the construction sites herself. One engineer remarks, "The Romans build with fear. She builds with curiosity." Historians still argue whether this wave of public works was an early form of infrastructure planning, or simply a way to employ returning soldiers. But the results endure: bridges, canals, and storage houses that would last centuries. As dusk falls, the queen retreats to the palace gardens. The scent of lotus and myrrh thickens the air. Fireflies blink lazily above the ponds. You sit with her on the stone bench, the marble still warm from the sun. "Do you ever miss war?" you ask quietly. She thinks for a long time. "No," she says finally. "But I miss the clarity it brings." In war, you know who you are every morning. In peace, you have to remind yourself. She leans back, eyes half closed. "Still," she adds, "I'd rather lose myself in peace than find myself in battle." You sit in silence together, listening to the frogs begin their chorus. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a soft melody on a lyre. The notes drift through the garden like slow-moving water. The queen speaks again, her tone gentler now. "My mother used to say the gods live in the space between breaths. That's why we pray quietly, so we don't startle them." She smiles faintly. "I think she was wrong, though. The gods live in laughter. They like a bit of noise." The conversation fades into comfortable quiet. The stars bloom overhead, brilliant, close, endless. A servant approaches with a clay tablet. Another letter from Rome, its seal unbroken. The queen sighs almost theatrically. Even silence doesn't keep them away. She breaks it open, scans it quickly, and laughs. "They've sent us more scholars. They want to study our customs." You glance at her, uncertain. "Will you let them?" She shrugs. "Why not? Let them study. We'll study them right back." Historians still discuss this as the beginning of a new cultural exchange. Roman architects sketching Kushite temples, Kushite scribes experimenting with Latin script, musicians borrowing melodies across borders. It's not dominance, it's dialogue. As the night deepens, the queen dismisses the guards and walks alone through the palace corridors. You follow at a respectful distance. Her footsteps echo softly against the stone, her shadow flickering against torchlight. When she reaches the balcony, she pauses, resting her hands on the carved railing. The moonlight turns her profile into a sculpture, ageless, unwavering. "When I die," she says quietly, "I hope they don't build statues. I'd rather they build bridges." You start to reply, but she lifts a hand to silence you. "Don't answer," she murmurs. "Just remember, the river glimmers below, its surface smooth as glass, a reflection of everything she's built, everything she's chosen not to destroy. And you do remember. Because somehow, even standing still, she makes history move. The heat thickens as the season turns towards summer. The days grow longer, the light sharper, bleaching the edges of every stone in Meroe. From dawn to dusk, the air hums with quiet industry. You can feel the rhythm of a city that knows how to sustain itself, not rushing, not resting, simply flowing. The Kandake sits in the shade of the palace veranda, her writing table cluttered with scrolls. The fan beside her moves lazily, stirred by a servant's rhythmic hand. She has aged a little, not in weakness but in gravity. The lines around her eyes have deepened like the cracks in an old statue that only make it more beautiful. Today's meeting is about schools. She's been obsessed lately with what she calls the inheritance of thought. War teaches fear, she says, but education teaches endurance. A young scholar bows low before her, holding a clay tablet. "Majesty, we've opened 5 new schools near Napata. The children can read temple hymns by 10 summers." The queen's face softens. "Good. Let them learn how to speak to gods before they learn how to fight men." She gestures for the scholar to rise. "Teach them geometry too. If they can measure the Nile, they can measure pride." Historians still argue whether Amanirenas truly established formal education for the children of Kush, or if this story grew over generations. But fragments of writing discovered centuries later seem to confirm it. Small tablets etched in Meroitic script, exercises about stars, numbers, and rivers, the quiet proof of a civilization that understood power wasn't just built, but taught. In the afternoon, she visits the temple district. Priests bow as she passes, the air thick with incense and echo. The smell is sharp, cedar, frankincense, the faint sweetness of oil burning in golden bowls. She walks between colossal statues, her feet stirring petals scattered by attendants. At the Temple of Isis, she stops before a wall fresco depicting her victory against Rome. The image is grand, chariots, arrows, lions. She studies it for a long moment, then says softly, "It's beautiful, but it lies." You glance at her, startled. "Lies, Majesty?" She smiles. "We didn't win by killing, we won by waiting." She brushes her fingers across the painted arrows. Artists like action. Patience is harder to paint. That evening she calls a gathering. Poets, priests, and philosophers. They sit in a circle on the palace floor, torches flickering, shadows swaying across the marble. The conversation flows like wine. Stories of gods, questions of destiny, arguments about the stars. One scholar, old and half-blind, says, "Majesty, the Romans claim the sun itself bends to their emperor." The queen chuckles softly. Then they must have never seen the Nile flood. Laughter ripples through the room. It's not just humor, it's pride, calm and deep. For all Rome's marble and metal, the people here know something older, a rhythm that outlasts dynasties. You listen as she tells them a legend, one her grandmother used to share under the same stars. "There was a time," she begins, "when lions spoke to kings. One lion told a ruler, 'Rule softly, or your echo will eat you.' The king laughed and ruled loudly. When he died, the wind carried only the lion's roar." She pauses, looking at the faces around her. "I try to remember that. Speak softly, but make sure the wind listens." Historians still debate whether these were her exact words or later embellishments. But they survive in oral songs even now, passed down like lullabies through Nubian villages, a testament to how her voice carried farther than her armies. When the council disperses, the queen remains behind, gazing up at the open roof where stars gleam faintly through the haze. You join her quietly. She gestures toward one bright cluster. "They say those are the souls of the brave," she murmurs. "I like to think they're the souls of the patient instead." You laugh softly. "Then the heavens must be full of you, Majesty." She smirks. "Not yet. I still have rivers to repair." The next few days are devoted to those rivers, engineers and builders gathering along the banks to expand irrigation channels. The queen stands among them, robes tucked, hands dusted with sand. She oversees the digging, measuring, marking, her mind alive with angles and flow. When one of the workers asks how she learned to design waterways, she shrugs. When you live by a river, you study it. You can't fight it, so you follow its logic. By noon, the sun blazes fiercely overhead. The smell of mud and reeds fills the air. A boy brings her water in a clay jug. She drinks, then pours a little on the ground. "For the river gods," she says. "They're the only ones who don't need temples." Historians still argue whether these irrigation reforms contributed to Meroe's agricultural boom. But even if the records fade, the logic remains sound. She ruled by flow, not by force. When the work is done, the queen returns to the palace, her sandals stained dark with wet earth. She doesn't wash them immediately. Instead, she walks through the halls, leaving faint footprints behind. "Let the palace remember where the real power lives," she says with a grin. That night, during a quiet dinner, she eats roasted yam and spiced lentils while listening to her musicians play. The melody is low, almost sleepy. You notice her eyes drifting toward the window, to where the moonlight glows on the river. She turns to you suddenly. "Do you think history ever dreams?" You blink. "Dreams, Majesty?" "Yes," she says, smiling faintly. "Maybe it sleeps inside us, waiting to be remembered." You want to ask what she dreams of, but she waves the question away with a soft laugh. "Don't worry, I only dream of tomorrow's breakfast." You laugh too, but you know she's lying. Her mind never stops working. Even in peace, her thoughts move like currents beneath still water. Later, as the palace dims and the night deepens, you walk past the courtyard where her sandals still rest by the door, the dried earth cracked on the soles. You pause, realizing that those tiny flecks of Nile mud, simple, brown, ordinary, carry more of her legacy than all her golden crowns. Because power, in her world, was never about shining brighter than others. It was about leaving quiet, lasting marks that time itself would hesitate to erase. Morning mist rises from the river again, thin and ghost-like, curling between palm trees and the reed huts near the water's edge. The city wakes in rhythm, merchants shouting softly, donkeys braying, the first clang of hammers echoing like a heartbeat through the workshops. You can smell wood smoke and the faint sweetness of dates roasting. Meroa is alive, industrious, and for the first time in a generation, safe. The Kandake watches it all from her balcony, cup of barley brew in hand, eyes thoughtful but calm. She's wrapped in a soft blue shawl, embroidered with threads of gold. The color catches the light, making her seem almost like part of the sky. "It's strange," she murmurs. "When I was young, I thought peace would feel quieter." You glance out with her. The sounds of the city swirl below, not chaotic, but vibrant. "It isn't quiet," you say, "but it's content." She nods. Contentment is the hardest kind of silence. Today's council is smaller. No generals, no envoys, only advisors and builders. They gather in the garden, seated on mats under the shade of sycamores. Birds flit through the branches above, scattering bits of sunlight across the group. "We've restored the canals," says one of the engineers, unrolling a papyrus map. "But we'll need more laborers if we want to extend the line toward Kyrgyz." The queen studies the drawing. "Hire from the villages," she says, "and pay them fair. Gold feeds faster than pride. A scribe beside you scribbles that down instantly." The queen notices and chuckles. "Don't write everything I say," she teases. "Some things are just air, but you know better." Her words have a way of turning into stone long after she's gone. After the meeting, she takes a solitary walk through the marketplace. The merchants barely react now. Her presence has become natural, part of the city's pulse. She pauses at a pottery stall where a young boy works clay with astonishing precision. His fingers shape a small jar, smooth and symmetrical. She watches him for a moment, then asks, "Who taught you that?" The boy looks up nervously. "My grandmother, Majesty." She says clay listens better than people. The queen laughs, genuinely. "Then your grandmother is wise. People dry out faster too." She buys the jar, though it's clearly unfinished, and tucks it under her arm as she moves on. Later, she places it on her desk beside her papyrus scrolls. "Remind me," she says to you, "never to stop learning from the children." Historians still debate whether Amanirenas personally fostered the arts or whether her reign simply gave artists room to flourish. But in truth, the two are the same. Safety and prosperity make creativity possible. That afternoon, she calls for her charioteer. "We're visiting the quarries," she announces. "I want to see where the temples breathe." You ride with her into the desert. The air grows hotter, shimmering with heat. The sandstone cliffs rise from the sand like ancient fortresses, their surfaces scarred by centuries of chiseling. The rhythmic sound of mallets striking stone echoes between the walls, punctuated by the occasional shout of foremen. The queen dismounts, walks toward a group of workers carving out a massive block. She runs her fingers along the grooves, feeling the pulse of the stone. "It's strange," she says softly. "This rock will outlive all of us, yet it depends on our touch to become beautiful." One stonemason laughs nervously. "Majesty, sometimes I think the stones are already beautiful. We just interrupt them." She grins. "Then make your interruptions count." You stand there, the heat rising around you, and realize this. Every place she visits, every person she speaks to, leaves changed. Not from command, but from attention. As the sun lowers, she calls the workers to rest. Water skins are passed around, laughter rippling through the quarry. Someone begins to sing. A low, rhythmic chant that starts as a work song but grows into something deeper. Others join in, voices blending into the hum of twilight. The queen closes her eyes, swaying slightly to the beat. "It's good," she says softly, "to hear a song that doesn't ask for victory. By the time you return to Meroa, the night has settled thick and warm. Lanterns flicker along the palace walls, and the scent of baked bread drifts through the corridors." She dismisses her attendants early and walks barefoot into the courtyard. You follow quietly, your footsteps echoing hers on the marble. She stops beside the lotus pond. The water mirrors the moon perfectly. For a while, neither of you speaks. Then, out of nowhere, she says, "Do you ever wonder if peace makes us lazy?" You hesitate. "Do you?" She smiles faintly. "No, but I think it tempts us to forget the effort it takes to keep it." She dips her hand into the pond, disturbing the reflection. The ripples spread slowly, turning the moon into silver fragments. "See," she says. "Even still, water needs tending." Historians still argue about how long her peace truly lasted. Some say 2 decades, others less. But records agree that under her rule, the kingdom of Kush reached one of its most stable and prosperous eras. As the night deepens, she calls for wine, not the sweet ceremonial kind, but a dark, earthy brew made from dates. She pours 2 cups, one for herself, one for you. "To the river," she says, raising it slightly. "To the river," you echo. You drink. And for a moment, the world feels suspended. No war, no empire, just the hum of life, the whisper of water, the slow drift of stars overhead. Before retiring, she says one last thing, quiet, almost an afterthought. "They'll write stories about battles," she murmurs, "but not about days like this." And yet, this is what victory feels like. Later, when she's gone to sleep, you linger by the pond. The night insects buzz, the water ripples gently. Somewhere far off, you can hear the faint rhythm of drums, not war drums, but the heartbeat of a people content in their survival. You look up at the moon again, unbroken now, whole once more, and realize that in the silence she's built, there's a lesson, the kind that doesn't fade, even when names do. A soft haze drapes over Meroa as the dry season settles in. Dust hangs in the morning air, catching the light and turning the streets golden. The hum of the city is steady but slower now. Oxen move lazily through the markets, fans creak in the palace windows, and the smell of wet clay mingles with the faint sweetness of date wine. The Kandake sits in her private study, her face half shadowed by the slats of sunlight filtering through carved shutters. Her desk is cluttered with scrolls, ink pots, and a single bowl of fresh figs. She's been reading reports, trade numbers, harvest tallies, letters from distant governors. Occasionally, she chuckles softly at something she reads, then shakes her head. "If reports grew food," she murmurs, "we'd never go hungry." You smile, watching her lean back and stretch her shoulders. The air smells faintly of ink and cedar oil. She dips her pen and begins writing again, her script flowing fast and confident. "This," she says, "is how power truly works. Not through shouting, but through ink that outlasts breath." She's writing a letter to the governor of the southern mines. A reminder, not a threat. "Tell him," she dictates, "that wealth buried in the earth is useless unless shared. Even gold rots if it's kept too long in the dark." The scribe hesitates, glancing up. "Majesty, gold doesn't rot." The queen grins. "Then perhaps it should." By mid-morning, the palace fills with visitors. A small delegation from a kingdom farther west has arrived, their clothes bright with geometric patterns, their accents thick with desert wind. They bring gifts, baskets of salt, ostrich feathers, and a drum carved from baobab wood. The leader bows deeply. "Queen of Meroa," he says, "your peace is known beyond the dunes. We come to learn, not to fight." She gestures for them to sit. "Then you're already wise," she replies. Over the next few hours, she listens to their tales. Droughts, caravans, lost cities swallowed by sand. She asks questions carefully, weighing each answer like a jeweler inspecting a gem. "The desert teaches patience," she says at last. "It punishes those who rush." One of the envoys, an older man with a deep voice, nods. "We heard you faced Rome without fear." She laughs softly. "I faced Rome with fear. That's how I survived it." The man smiles. "Then you teach even the brave how to be honest." Historians still argue about the extent of Amanirenas' influence across Africa. Some claim her diplomacy inspired alliances stretching deep into Nubia and the Sahel. Others say her reputation simply traveled faster than she did. But in this moment, watching her talk and listen with the patience of a sculptor shaping marble, you understand how legends grow, not from miracles, but from consistency. After the meeting, she leads her guests to the royal gardens. The sun beats hard on the tiles, but the air is softened by the scent of flowering reeds and jasmine. A small pool reflects the sky, so perfectly still that clouds seem to float beneath the surface. She kneels beside it, scooping a handful of water and letting it spill through her fingers. "This," she tells the envoys, "is how I govern, not by grasping, but by flowing." They nod, understanding, though she hasn't spoken like a ruler giving advice, more like a teacher planting seeds. That night, a banquet fills the palace hall. Tables stretch beneath hanging lanterns. Platters of roasted grains, fish with saffron, and figs soaked in honey are passed from hand to hand. Musicians play slow melodies on lyres and drums. the rhythm matching the heartbeat of the evening. You sit nearby, listening to the queen laugh with her guests. Her laughter isn't loud, but it carries, smooth, low, alive. When someone asks her about Rome again, she waves her hand dismissively. "I prefer stories about us," she says. The Romans write enough about themselves. The crowd laughs, the sound echoing warmly through the hall. As the night deepens, the guests take turns offering toasts. One praises her wisdom, another her strength, a third her beauty. She smiles politely at all of them, but raises her cup only when a young poet stands and says, "To the queen who made patience fashionable." She grins. Finally, someone understands my empire. When the last of the guests retire, the music fades, and the hall falls quiet. You walk with her through the empty corridors, the stone cool underfoot. The torches crackle softly. She's humming. An old tune, wordless, perhaps one her mother used to sing. Outside, the air feels different, the kind of stillness that follows satisfaction. The moon hangs low, fat and orange, reflected in the river's slow swirl. The queen leans on the balustrade. I used to think glory was a sound, trumpets, cheers, the roar of war. But it's not. It's this, the silence that doesn't hurt anymore. You glance at her, the soft light playing across her face, the faint smile resting there. "You've built something lasting," you say quietly. She doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she dips her fingers into the air, tracing invisible circles like writing on mist. "Nothing lasts," she says eventually. "Not walls, not treaties, but maybe stories do. Maybe patience does." A breeze drifts up from the river, carrying the scent of lilies and silt. She closes her eyes, letting it touch her face. "You hear that?" she whispers. You listen. The faint chirp of insects, the water lapping the banks, the distant laughter of someone still awake in the city. "That," she says softly, "is my favorite sound. The sound of life continuing without me." Historians still debate when Amanirenas began preparing for her succession. Some say she trained her heirs long before her final years, others that she trusted her advisors to guide the transition. But in this moment, it's clear she's already thinking beyond herself. When she turns to leave, you notice her shoulders, still strong, but slightly bowed under invisible weight. You realize that peace, like war, leaves its marks. Before she disappears into the palace, she says one last thing over her shoulder. "Don't ever write about me as if I was perfect. Write me as someone who tried," and then she's gone, swallowed by the soft glow of torchlight, leaving behind only the echo of her steps and the quiet conviction that trying, not winning, was what truly made her great. The following week begins with a soft rain, the kind that doesn't fall so much as drift. It slicks the palace stones and gathers in tiny rivulets, tracing the paths time has carved between bricks. You wake early to the sound of it, steady and calm, a lullaby from the sky. The Kandake is already awake. She stands barefoot in the courtyard, letting the rain fall against her face. Her attendants hover nearby, anxious, but she waves them off. "Let it," she says. The earth remembers kindness through rain. You watch her quietly, the gray light turning her silhouette into something mythic, a figure that belongs equally to this world and the one history keeps half hidden. When she finally turns, her expression is peaceful, almost amused. "I used to pray for rain during the war," she murmurs. "Now it just visits on its own." She steps beneath the covered walkway, shaking droplets from her hair. "Come," she says. "We're visiting the archives today. I want to see what the scribes think I've done." The archives sit behind the temple complex, their entrance guarded by carved lions whose faces are smooth from centuries of touch. Inside, the air is cool and smells of papyrus, oil, and faint mildew. Scrolls line the walls in neat bundles, records of taxes, births, trades, treaties, rainfall, even dreams recorded by priests. A young archivist bows deeply as the queen enters. His hands tremble slightly as he leads her to a small chamber lit by oil lamps. On the table lies a stack of fresh scrolls, histories of her reign, still wet with ink. The Kandake glances at one, unrolls it, and begins to read aloud. "Her wisdom equals that of Amun himself," she recites, raising an eyebrow. Her enemies bowed like reeds before her. She looks up, smirking. "Reeds don't bow, they bend." "There's a difference." The scribe flushes red. "Majesty, it's poetic exaggeration," she laughs softly. Then exaggerate my mistakes too. Balance keeps history honest. You can't help but smile. She has no interest in mythologizing herself. She wants memory, not myth. As she continues reading, she pauses at a section describing her treaty with Rome. She muses. They call it a peace of equals. That's generous. She traces a finger along the ink. History will make it sound clean. But peace never is. It's patched together like a quilt. Strong because it's imperfect. Historians still debate the tone of those early records, whether they painted her as divine or human, idealized or practical. But the truth likely lies somewhere between. She was both the woman and the legend, simultaneously building and questioning the very story that would outlast her. After a while, she grows quiet, still holding the scroll in her hands. Strange, she says softly, to read about yourself as if you're already gone. You ask gently, does it feel accurate? She smiles. No, but maybe it doesn't need to. Accuracy is for maps. Stories are for hearts. The archivist, encouraged, asks timidly, Majesty, would you like to dictate your own version, so the scribes may preserve it exactly as you wish? The queen shakes her head. No. If I write my own history, it becomes a defense. Let others argue about me. That's how memory stays alive. Outside, the rain begins to ease, the sound softening until only the occasional drop falls from the eaves. The air smells clean, like renewal. When she leaves the archives, she stops at the temple steps to watch the city emerge from the mist. Workers sweep puddles from the streets, children chase reflections in the wet ground, and merchants rearrange their goods with practiced ease. You see, she says quietly, they don't need me to tell their stories. They're already writing them. That evening, a messenger arrives from the southern frontier, a long, thin man with dust on his robe and exhaustion in his eyes. He kneels before the queen and says, Majesty, the mines overflow. The gold veins grow deeper than expected. The court murmurs approvingly, but she doesn't smile. Overflow? She repeats. That's what rivers do before they flood. She stands, pacing slowly, thinking. Tell them to stop digging for a season. Let the earth rest. The messenger looks confused. Majesty, the miners will be angered. The prophet, gold doesn't feed anyone. She cuts in. Soil does. If the earth breaks, no coin will buy it back. Historians still debate whether this decision reflected early environmental wisdom or simply practical governance. But one surviving decree from her reign reads clearly, the earth is patient only with those who are patient with her. Later that night, she invites her closest advisors to a quiet meal. There's no ceremony, just bowls of lentil stew, bread still steaming from the oven, and pomegranates sliced open to reveal their ruby seeds. The flicker of lamplight dances across her face as she speaks. I wonder, she says, if the gods ever regret giving us memory. The high priest tilts his head. Without memory, Majesty, we'd repeat every mistake. She smiles faintly, and with it we repeat only half. Everyone chuckles, but the room grows thoughtful. You realize she isn't merely musing, she's preparing. Not for war, not for ceremony, but for the slow withdrawal of someone who knows her work is nearly done. When the others leave, you remain behind as she rises to pour water into a small bronze bowl. My father used to pour libations for the river, she says. He said it carried our worries away faster than our prayers. She tips the bowl, letting the water spill over the floor. Tonight, I send mine downstream. You watch as the last drops glisten in the lamplight before vanishing into the cracks of the stone. Outside, the stars return, scattered and brilliant, reflected in the wet streets like tiny fires. The queen walks to the window and whispers, almost to herself, the sky remembers too much. It's time to teach it how to rest. She turns to you, her voice suddenly warm again. Tomorrow we ride east. I want to see where the wind begins. And with that, she smiles, blows out the lamp, and leaves the night to its quiet remembering. The journey east begins before dawn. The stars are still visible, faint and sleepy, when the Kandake mounts her chariot. The horses snort clouds of mist into the cool air, their harnesses jingling softly. You follow close behind, wrapped in a thin cloak, the horizon only beginning to blush with color. The queen turns briefly to you, her expression serene. We've followed the river long enough, she says. Now we'll follow the wind. The caravan moves out quietly, wheels crunching over the sand. Behind you, Meroa fades into the distance, its towers, its smoke, its hum of civilization swallowed by the pale desert. Ahead lies the shimmer of the eastern highlands, where red cliffs rise like sleeping giants, and the scent of salt begins to tinge the air. By mid-morning, the heat has thickened. The landscape changes. Dunes give way to low rocky plains, dotted with thorn trees and wild herbs that release sharp fragrance underfoot. The wind comes strong here, constant, whispering against your skin like a living thing. The Kandake pauses her chariot near a ridge and gestures for everyone to stop. "Listen," she says. At first you hear nothing but the rustle of sand. Then, faintly, there's a rhythm. Not voice, not drum, but the steady hum of the wind itself. It seems to carry melody, rising and falling like breath. "You hear that?" she asks softly. "That's what I came for." You tilt your head. "The wind?" She smiles. "No, the sound between it." For a long while she stands there, her eyes half closed, her face turned toward the invisible current. It's as though she's conversing with the air, some ancient dialogue no one else can hear. Historians still debate the meaning of these excursions she took late in her reign. Some claim she sought spiritual renewal. Others suggest she was mapping new trade routes toward the Red Sea. Perhaps it was both. But standing there with the wind pulling at her robe and the sky endless above, you sense she's looking for something older than commerce, the edge of knowing itself. When she finally speaks again, her voice is almost a whisper. "The priests say the gods live in temples. I think they live here, where nothing hides them." The caravan continues east until it reaches a cluster of cliffs overlooking a wide valley. Below, a river glimmers faintly, its course threading through scrub and dust before vanishing into the horizon. The queen dismounts, descends slowly, and kneels at the edge. She scoops a handful of sand and lets it run through her fingers. "Rome measures power in walls," she says quietly. "We measure it in how far the wind carries our names." A guard approaches, hesitant. "Majesty, shall we make camp?" She nods. "Yes, but no tents." "Let the sky see us." By nightfall, the campfire glows like a lonely star in the vast plain. The queen sits cross-legged near the flames, her face lit gold. Around her, soldiers and servants form a loose circle. The wind never stops. It hums softly, threading through their hair, flickering the firelight. She begins to tell a story. "Once, long ago," she says, "a woman tried to catch the wind in her hands. She climbed the tallest mountain, wrapped her fingers around the air, and ran home to show her people. But when she opened her hands, they laughed. Nothing was there. So she climbed again and again until one day she realized the wind was never meant to be caught. It was meant to be followed. You can see the faces around her, spellbound, reflective. She stopped climbing after that," the queen continues, "but she never stopped walking. Her children said she lived forever, because she was never still." When she finishes, the fire crackles, filling the silence her words leave behind. The men shift quietly, staring into the flames. The story isn't about conquest or gods. It's about movement, impermanence, and the strange peace of letting go. Later, when most of the camp has fallen asleep, you find her still awake, watching the horizon. The moonlight outlines her profile, strong, proud, softened by age but unbent. "Majesty," you say softly. You're thinking again. She smiles without looking at you. "Always. That's how I keep the gods from getting bored." You both sit there for a while, listening to the endless sigh of the wind. She picks up a small stone, smooth and pale, and presses it into your palm. "Keep that," she says. "It's from the same ground the Romans never learned to understand. Too light to build with, too soft to fight on, but it endures all the same." You close your hand around it. The stone is warm from her touch. Historians still discuss the symbolism of her later travels, her fascination with the desert, her quiet meditations on impermanence. Some scholars even call it her philosophical reign, the period where she ruled more through reflection than decree. But to you, watching her now, she isn't a philosopher or a ruler. She's simply a woman learning how to exist after greatness. The next morning, the wind rises early. The sky is clear, vast, blindingly blue. As the caravan prepares to depart, she climbs one of the low ridges and looks eastward again, toward the unseen Red Sea, toward whatever lies beyond memory. "Do you know?" she says softly. why I wanted to come here. You shake your head. Because I needed to see where everything begins. Rome builds monuments to endings. We build roads to beginnings. The breeze catches her robe, lifting it like a sail. She turns slightly, her gaze soft. The world will forget my treaties, my walls, my armies. But maybe if the wind remembers my name, that's enough. Then she descends, calm and unhurried, as though she's already become part of the rhythm she sought. When the caravan turns west again, the wind follows, steady, loyal, whispering faintly through the air as if repeating her story in languages only the sand can hear. And you realize, as the dunes rise and fall behind you, that this journey was never about distance. It was about returning to silence, the truest kind of home. By the time the caravan returns to Meroe, the air has changed. It isn't the wind, it's the feeling. The city moves at a slower rhythm now, not from fatigue, but from the kind of stillness that follows realization. The Queen's long journey east has rippled through her people like quiet thunder. They know, somehow, that something inside her has shifted. She rides through the city gates not with trumpets or banners, but to the soft hum of the crowd. Men and women line the streets, holding baskets of grain and garlands of reeds. No one cheers. Instead, they bow their heads slightly in a gesture of recognition. They aren't greeting a conqueror or a queen. They're welcoming something gentler. A spirit returned from conversation with the wind. The Kandake dismounts, dust still clinging to her sandals. A child steps forward, no older than 7, and hands her a small clay bird. She turns it over in her palm, smiling. "You made this?" she asks. The boy nods shyly. "It's for luck, so the wind won't forget you." Her laugh is low, musical, tired in the most human way. "Then I'll keep it near my window." Later, inside the palace, she places the little bird on her writing table beside her scrolls and ink jars. It sits there awkwardly, slightly lopsided, yet it draws the light in a way that makes it seem alive. She looks at you, her voice soft. "I think I've been chasing the wrong kind of immortality." "What kind do you mean?" "The kind that depends on remembering," she says. "The better kind is when forgetting no longer matters." Historians still argue what that line meant, whether it was her meditation on legacy or her acceptance of mortality. But to you, standing there in that room heavy with the smell of ink and dust, it feels less like philosophy and more like freedom. That afternoon she summons her council. They gather beneath the colonnade where vines crawl lazily over marble pillars. The air hums with cicadas. Her voice, when she speaks, is steady but lighter than you've ever heard it. "From this day," she says, "I no longer wish to rule the world's noise. I will tend to its silence." The officials glance at one another, unsure, uneasy. One of them clears his throat. "Majesty, do you mean to step down?" She shakes her head. "No, I mean to listen more." The silence that follows is almost reverent. Then one by one they bow. They don't fully understand her yet. Not all wisdom arrives on schedule. But they trust her tone, and that's enough. In the weeks that follow, the Queen changes the rhythm of her rule. She delegates most political duties to her council, focusing instead on what she calls the maintenance of balance. She spends more time walking among the people, unguarded, unannounced. She listens to complaints, stories, gossip, even songs. "You can't know a kingdom," she tells you once, "until you know its small talk." You accompany her through the markets where incense burns thick, blending with the smell of spices and sweat. At one stall, a merchant offers her figs and insists she take them for free. She accepts only one, biting into it and nodding thoughtfully. "Still warm from the sun," she says. That's the best kind of wealth. Later, she visits the schools. Children run to her, waving tablets covered in script. "Majesty, I wrote your name," one girl exclaims proudly, showing her a messy string of symbols. The Kandake laughs. "Perfect," she says. "Now try to spell patience." Historians still debate the educational reforms of her later years, whether she formalized literacy programs or merely encouraged them. But every surviving inscription from that era becomes a quiet echo of her influence, softer handwriting, more curved, as if written by calmer hands. In the evenings, she sits outside the palace gates rather than within. Anyone may approach her, shepherds, potters, sailors, and they do. She listens, nods, sometimes laughs. A fisherman tells her about a crocodile that stole his net. She advises him to try asking politely next time. Crocodiles appreciate manners. The people adore her for this. The laughter she inspires is not the laughter of amusement, but of belonging. It's the kind that softens fear. One night, as the stars bloom overhead, she speaks to you quietly. Do you know why Rome lost to us? You think carefully. Because they underestimated you, she smiles. No, because they were too proud to laugh. She leans back against the pillar, eyes on the horizon. Empires crumble when they forget how to find joy in small things. You sit together in silence, the sounds of the city drifting around you, the distant rhythm of drums, the hiss of oil lamps, the hum of conversation. The queen hums under her breath, the same tune she heard the workers singing in the quarries months ago. She turns to you suddenly, her expression softer than moonlight. Promise me, she says, if history ever forgets my name, it will at least remember my laughter. You nod. I promise. Historians still argue whether Amanirenas' final years were truly peaceful, or whether new tensions simmered beyond the Nile. But records show no war, no famine, no rebellion, just an aging queen who had mastered the rare art of contentment. The clay bird remains by her window. Some nights, when the wind is right, it hums faintly, as if singing. One morning, she rises before dawn and walks to the temple roof alone. The city lies below, wrapped in soft mist, the Nile glowing silver in the first light. She closes her eyes, breathes deeply, and says, all of this was enough. You stand behind her, watching the sun spill across the rooftops. The moment feels eternal, suspended between breath and history, and you understand, without needing to ask, that the world has finally learned her rhythm, patient, quiet, unbreakable.
The sun climbs higher every morning now, and with it comes a sense of slowing, not decline exactly, but a quiet settling of things. The Kandake's palace feels softer, more human. The guards no longer stand stiffly by the doors. Courtiers walk barefoot through the corridors. Even the royal gardens seem to exhale in the heat, lotus blossoms opening lazily in the midday sun. The queen spends more time in her writing chamber, surrounded by scrolls and low tables stacked with clay tablets. The smell of ink and beeswax fills the air. Her once rapid handwriting has grown slower, more deliberate, but her thoughts remain sharp. This morning, she dictates to her scribe, her voice low and measured. Write this, she says. To remember is not to preserve, but to understand. The scribe looks up. Majesty, is this a letter? She shakes her head. No, it's a reminder to myself. And to the wind, in case it's eavesdropping again. You can't help but smile. She's joking. But there's truth there, the kind of truth she now hides in humor. After a while, she sets down her pen, rubs her temples, and looks toward the open window. The faint rustle of the river drifts in. Do you ever wonder, she asks quietly, what happens when we stop being stories and start being silence? You pause before answering. Maybe silence is just another kind of story. She smiles faintly. Then I hope mine hums softly enough not to wake the gods. Later that day, she insists on walking to the artisan's quarter. The streets buzz with life. Smiths hammering bronze, weavers singing as they dye cloth, potters shaping vases from red clay. Children dart between the stalls, their laughter bouncing off the sandstone walls. When they see her, people stop what they're doing, not out of fear or ceremony, but affection. She stops, too, greeting each group as if they were old friends. A potter offers her a newly fired vessel, still warm from the kiln. Majesty, he says, it's not perfect, but it holds. She turns it in her hands, studying the glaze. Neither am I, she says, but I've held worse. Laughter ripples through the crowd. Historians still debate whether Amanirenas' reign truly embodied quality, or these anecdotes grew larger with retelling. Yet every inscription and every oral account agrees on one point. Her people loved her, not just as ruler, but as person. At a nearby workshop, a young woman is painting murals on a temple wall. Scenes of the Nile, of festivals, of women harvesting grain. The queen pauses to watch. You've painted no battles, she observes. The artist nods. Because the people remember the peace more. The queen looks at her for a long moment, something flickering in her eyes. Pride, maybe gratitude. Then, paint more peace, she says softly. That evening, the palace hosts a quiet gathering, not a formal banquet, but a shared meal beneath the open sky. Candles flicker in clay bowls, casting soft halos of light. Musicians play slowly, the kind of melodies that seem to come from deep in the earth. The queen sits cross-legged among her guests. Farmers, healers, traders, priests, a circle of the kingdom's pulse. There are no ranks here tonight. She eats dates and roasted grains with her fingers, passing food to those beside her. One elderly woman, her hair silver and her back bent, reaches for the queen's hand. "Majesty," she whispers, "when my husband died in the war, I cursed the gods. But now I thank them, because peace came after and my sons grew in it." The queen squeezes her hand gently. "I've cursed them too," she says. They don't seem to mind. Perhaps they enjoy honesty. There's a murmur of laughter, tender and real. The queen's eyes glisten in the firelight, but she blinks it away, smiling again. "We survived," she says simply. "That's enough prayer for one lifetime." Later that night, she walks alone through the city. The streets are quiet now, bathed in silver moonlight. You follow a few paces behind, listening to the soft scrape of her sandals on stone. She stops at the edge of the river. The water moves gently, carrying faint reflections of stars. The Nile never forgets its direction, she says quietly, even when it floods, even when it dries. "Maybe I've been trying to be too much like it." You ask softly, "Is that a bad thing?" She shakes her head. "No, but sometimes it's enough to be the shore, to hold still and let others flow." She kneels, scoops a handful of water, and pours it over her hands. "For my ancestors," she whispers, "and for the ones who will never know my name." Historians still discuss whether these nightly walks were ritual or reflection, but among the people, legends say the queen spoke to the river, and that it answered, not with words, but with calm. When you return to the palace, she pauses before the door and looks back at the city one last time that night. "I think," she says softly, "I've done what I was meant to. The rest is just the Nile finishing the story." Her voice is tired, yes, but not weary. It carries that rare peace that comes when the work is complete and the heart has learned to stop clinging. As she disappears into the dim corridor, you feel the faintest stir of wind from the east, dry, warm, steady. You remember her words from the desert. "The wind remembers what the world forgets." And now, standing beneath the stars, you know it's true. Somewhere beyond hearing, the wind hums through the palm trees, carrying her story into tomorrow. The days lengthen into gold, and Meroe breathes in slow rhythm, like an aging lion, powerful but calm. You begin to notice small changes in the queen. Her steps, once swift and deliberate, have grown slower, not from weakness, but from a kind of deliberate grace. She speaks less in commands, more in observations. Her laughter still fills the halls, but now it trails off into thought rather than echo. This morning, she sits by the lotus pond in the palace courtyard, feeding the birds. A white ibis, sleek, cautious, approaches her knee. She tosses a grain of barley and smiles. "You see," she says softly, "even the gods' messengers learn patience when there's food involved." You chuckle. "You've tamed the ibis?" She tilts her head. "No, I've just made an appointment it's willing to keep." The attendants nearby laugh quietly, relieved by her humor. They love her most on these tranquil mornings when the air smells faintly of wet earth and jasmine. The queen gestures for you to sit beside her. "Do you ever think," she says after a pause, "that ruling is a bit like gardening?" "How so?" She plucks a lotus petal, holds it up to the light. You spend years nurturing, pruning, watering, and then one day, the garden tends itself. You're just there to enjoy the shade. Historians still debate whether this metaphor marked her preparation for abdication, or simply her philosophy of maturity. Whatever the meaning, that's how she lives from then on. Less ruler, more caretaker balance. The afternoon is warm, full of buzzing insects and slow-moving shadows. You walk with her through the city again, but this time it feels different. The people don't just bow. They wave. They call her Mother of Peace, a title she never claimed but never refused. At one weaving stall, an elderly man beckons her closer. "Majesty, I kept this since the war, he says, holding out a fragment of torn Roman cloth. You defeated their army. I cut this from a soldier's cloak. Thought you might want it. The Kandake studies a frayed fabric. It's crimson faded to rust. Keep it, she says finally. Reminders are heavier than they look. The man nods, clutching at his chest, eyes wet. Then I'll bury it under my fig tree. She smiles. That's the best use for war I've heard yet. You both continue walking, the sun dipping lower. The Queen's gaze lingers on everything. The stalls, the children, the smell of roasted millet in the air, as though she's memorizing them. That evening, back in the palace, she calls for you and her scribe. On the table lies a new papyrus scroll, its surface clean and waiting. Write this, she says quietly. Let it be known. Peace is not the absence of battle, but the refusal to forget kindness when battle ends. The scribe hesitates, then writes carefully, each stroke deliberate. When he's done, she seals the document with her ring, not as law, but as a statement. You think they'll remember that? You ask. She smiles faintly. No, but I will, and maybe that's enough. Historians still argue whether this was her final decree or merely a personal reflection. But the document survives, and even centuries later, fragments of that sentence are carved into a temple wall, worn by time, but still legible. That night, she hosts a small gathering of musicians and poets. They sit under the stars, drinking date wine and reciting verses about rivers and stars and ordinary love. The Queen leans back on her cushion, eyes half closed. If I had been born a singer, she murmurs, I'd have started fewer wars. Someone replies, Majesty, you ended more than enough to make up for it. She laughs, low and warm. Fair trade, then. You watch her silhouette against the firelight, her profile serene, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The faint wrinkles around her eyes seem to deepen with each smile, but there's beauty in that too, the kind earned from long nights of choosing gentleness over pride. Later, after everyone drift away, she asks you to walk with her once more to the temple at the city's edge. The moon is high, and the sand glows pale under its light. When you reach the steps, she stops before the statue of a lion-headed goddess, Sekhmet, the bringer of both destruction and healing. I used to be afraid of her, the Queen says quietly. All that fury carved into stone. But now I think she's just tired. Tired, you echo. Of being remembered for the roar, she says, when she probably just wanted to rest. You stand together in silence. The night wind moves gently, carrying the faint sound of a distant flute. She takes a deep breath, places a single lotus petal at the statue's feet, and whispers, Thank you for teaching me restraint. Historians still discuss whether this moment symbolized a retirement from divine warfare or a personal reconciliation with power. But here, it feels more like gratitude. A queen acknowledging the limits of control. When you return to the palace, she pauses before entering her chamber. Tomorrow, she says softly, we begin the work of endings. Quietly, you nod, though something heavy stirs in your chest. You know what she means, not abdication, but preparation, the slow folding of a life into stillness. Before she retires, she adds almost playfully, and tell the cooks to prepare honey cakes in the morning. The gods like them, and I might need their favor soon. You laugh, though your throat tightens. I'll tell them. The door closes gently behind her. That night, as the city sleeps, a breeze moves to the palm trees, rustling like whispered memory. You can almost hear it, her laughter mingling with the wind, soft, unending, at peace. Morning breaks with a softness that feels rehearsed, the kind of sunrise that arrives already knowing its purpose. The palace stirs slowly. Servants move in quiet rhythm. The cooks preparing the promised honey cakes, their scent rising into the air like incense. The Queen sits by her window, brushing her hair, the strands catching the light like fine gold threads. You know, she murmurs, every strand of hair is a story about patience. You glance up from the scrolls on her desk. Patience? She nods, smiling faintly. It grows whether you notice it or not. Cut it and it still returns. There's a lesson there. That morning, she insists on visiting the royal tombs outside the city, a place she has avoided for years. The journey takes you across fields of sun-bleached grass and dunes that seem to breathe in the wind. Camels carry the attendants and the offerings, jars of oil, lotus flowers, and woven linen. When you reach the necropolis, the air changes, quieter, cooler, as if even the sand respects the dead. Pyramids rise ahead, smaller than Egypt's but more elegant, their steep faces etched with symbols of eternal rebirth. The queen dismounts and stands for a long moment, gazing at them. "These are not monuments to death," she says softly. "They're reminders of continuity. Even endings here know their place." You follow her as she walks toward one of the tombs, the one she built years ago, but never entered. The entrance yawns before you like a sigh, the interior dim and fragrant with old incense. Torches flicker, revealing painted scenes. Her victories, her feasts, her processions, but also the simpler moments she insists to be added later. Children laughing, market stalls, a woman weaving cloth. "I didn't want the gods to think I took myself too seriously," she says, half smiling. "They might get ideas." Historians still argue about this, whether Amanirenas truly designed her own tomb imagery, defying convention, or whether later artists softened her legend. But the scenes exist, undeniably human. At the back of the chamber lies a carved stone table where ritual items rest, alabaster jars, small gold amulets, and one object that shouldn't surprise you, the little clay bird, now carefully repaired after a crack. She runs her fingers over it. "It's still ugly," she says affectionately, but loyal. She sets it back in its place and turns to you. "If I could choose one thing to be remembered for, it wouldn't be the battles or even the peace." "What then?" She exhales. "For being fully awake in my own time." Outside, the wind hums low, sweeping grains of sand against the pyramid walls. It sounds like whispering. When she emerges, the attendants bow deeply, expecting ceremony, but she waves them off. "Too much bowing makes the spine lazy," she says. "Walk upright. The gods aren't short." The procession moves slowly back toward the city. Along the way, children chase the camels, laughing. The queen tosses them pieces of dried fruit. "A fair tax," she says lightly. That night, she hosts what will become her last public feast. The courtyard glows with oil lamps. Musicians play mellow tunes on harps and drums. The guests, nobles, scholars, even foreign envoys, recline on woven mats, eating honey cakes and roasted lamb. The queen raises her cup. "To the Nile," she says, for never staying still long enough to grow bored. Laughter ripples through the crowd, but after the laughter fades, she adds more quietly. "And to the people, for teaching me that peace is the bravest thing we can build." Her voice doesn't tremble. It doesn't need to. Every word falls like a stone into a calm river, rippling outward in perfect circles. As the night deepens, the queen steps away from the feast and walks to the edge of the courtyard, where the shadows of palm trees stretch long across the sand. You follow, but she doesn't turn. She knows you're there. "Do you think," she asks softly, "they'll remember the sound of this night?" You pause. "Maybe not the sound," you say, "but the warmth." She nods slowly. "That's enough." A cool breeze brushes past, carrying the faint music of the harps. She closes her eyes, breathing it in like a prayer. "Every ending deserves music," she whispers, "even the quiet ones." The next morning, she rises early, her energy steady but strangely light, as if she's already halfway between presence and legend. She spends the day in small gestures, thanking the servants, feeding the doves, sitting by the lotus pond until the shadows turn long. At sunset, she gathers a few trusted attendants and asks to be left alone in the great hall. The walls glow in amber light, reflecting on the golden-laid murals. You stay just beyond the door, listening as her sandals brush across the floor. There's no sound of collapse, no gasp, only stillness. When you finally enter, she's seated upright on the low dais, hands folded, eyes closed, a faint smile resting on her lips. The last light of day touches her face. It feels less like death than a deliberate exhale, the final note of a song perfectly sung. Historians, of course, still argue. Some claim she died peacefully that evening. Others believe she abdicated and vanished into the desert as a hermit queen. But the people of Meroe tell it differently. They say that at dusk, the Nile shimmered brighter than usual, and the ibis flew low over the water, heading north, as if escorting her spirit home. You stand beside her throne for a long time, the world humming softly around you. There is no mourning, no fear, only gratitude, quiet, steady, and vast as the desert itself. The next day, the palace awakens to an unusual quiet. Not the uneasy kind that follows disaster, but the reverent hush that comes when everyone already knows what has happened before words are spoken. The sun rises gently over Meroe, its light sliding across the sandstone walls like a blessing. Birds circle above the palace roof. Somewhere in the distance, a woman begins to sing, a soft, wavering melody without words, the kind sung for journeys, not farewells. You walk through the halls in slow steps. Every doorway seems to breathe memory. The scent of myrrh, the echo of laughter, the rustle of silk against the floor. Servants move carefully, placing garlands of lotus and palm leaves along the corridors. No one cries aloud. In Nubia, tears are private and gratitude louder than grief. By midday, the entire city gathers before the palace gates. Farmers in dust-covered tunics stand beside nobles in embroidered linen. Children sit on their parents' shoulders. Even the traders who once haggled noisily in the markets now bow their heads. The river glimmers nearby, carrying the murmur of the crowd like a second heartbeat. You stand at the top of the palace steps, beside the counselors and high priests. When the queen's body is carried out, wrapped in white cloth, sunlight catches on the golden thread woven into her shroud. A hush falls over the square, not out of fear, but awe. Even in stillness, she commands attention. The high priest of Ammonius raises his staff. The mother of peace returns to the wind, he declares, and the wind shall remember her. Historians still argue whether this line was ritual or spontaneous, but it survives in nearly every account, carved later into stone as her epitaph. The procession moves slowly toward the royal necropolis, the same path she walked just days ago. Musicians follow, their flutes playing in minor tones, accompanied by the deep rhythm of hand drums. The sound rolls like the river, steady, unhurried. You follow behind, the heat pressing gently against your back. The sand shifts under each step, and yet there's something reassuring about the rhythm of feet moving together, a collective heartbeat keeping time with memory. When the caravan reaches her pyramid, the sun sits low on the horizon. The golden light turns everything the color of honey. The attendants place her within the tomb she built, among the painted scenes of life, laughter, and lotus petals. The little clay bird rests once more near her head. Before the door is sealed, the high priest turns to the crowd and says, "She was born to rule, but she chose to listen." Someone in the crowd whispers, and the Nile will remember her laughter. And maybe it will, that night, when you return to the city. The streets glow with thousands of oil lamps. No morning wails echo through the air. Only quiet songs, lullabies of peace. It feels less like an ending and more like the exhale of a long, beautiful story. The next morning, you walk along the riverbank. The water moves lazily, carrying papyrus leaves and a reflection of pink dawn clouds. At the far end of the shore, a group of children are playing. They're building something from mud and reeds, small pyramids, uneven but proud. "What are you making?" you ask. One girl answers without looking up. "A house for the queen's bird." Her brother adds, "So it can keep singing the wind." You stand there for a long time, listening to the laughter, the splashing, the ordinary continuation of life. It's exactly what you would have wanted. The hum of existence carrying on without pause, without solemnity. Historians centuries later will dig here. They'll uncover fragments of jewelry, pottery, iron tools, and inscriptions half lost to the sand. They'll argue over meanings, whether Amanirenas truly shared power, whether her armies reached as far north as Philae, whether she negotiated her treaty with Augustus in person or through emissaries. They'll debate her lineage, her faith, her motives, but none of them will capture the sound of her voice when she said, "Peace is the bravest thing we can build." That sound lives only here, in the hush of the wind over the Nile, in the laughter of children building small clay pyramids, in your memory as you walk back toward the city. In later centuries, when travelers from Greece and Rome speak of Nubia, they'll mention its gold, its iron, its fierce queens who dare to defy empires. They'll write in admiration, sometimes envy, sometimes condescension. But in the quiet spaces of their accounts, between the boasts and the exaggerations, her presence lingers. They can't quite erase her. Her temples crumble, her language fades, her monuments sink under drifting dunes. Yet her image, the one carved with that faint, knowing smile, survives in fragments, each piece carrying the same calm defiance. You stand again at the edge of the city that was once hers. The evening light stretches long across the ground. You can almost imagine her walking beside you, sandals brushing sand, gold bracelets catching the dying sun. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. The wind picks up, moving through the palms. Somewhere far to the north, the Nile bends around another kingdom. Somewhere far to the south, new rulers rise and fall. But here, in this moment, the air hums with something unbroken. Her rhythm, her serenity. You close your eyes, and for a heartbeat, you hear her laughter again, faint bright, like ripples over water. And you know that history hasn't forgotten her. It's just whispering her name in a language too gentle for conquest to hear. Evening returns to Meroe like an old friend, slow, golden, unhurried. The pyramids on the horizon catch the last blush of sunlight, their sharp edges softening under the haze of the desert wind. You stand at the edge of the necropolis again, watching as the shadows stretch and dissolve into sand. The air hums low, like the quiet vibration of a harp string just after it's been plucked. This is where her story settles, not in silence, but in equilibrium. The city she built hums gently in the background, alive with its ordinary noises. The creak of ox carts, the chatter of evening markets, the laughter of children who have long stopped being afraid of the dark. You walk among the smaller pyramids, tracing the hieroglyphs carved by hands long turned to dust. Many are unreadable now, worn smooth by centuries of wind, but some phrases remain clear. One reads simply, "She listened." Another, "She laughed." You realize with a small smile that these are her truest legacies. Above you, the stars begin to appear, slow and deliberate. The same constellations she once studied with her astrologers now glitter with unbothered patience. You think of her sitting on that temple roof, long ago, gazing up and asking if the gods could hear laughter through stone. Historians, of course, still argue. They debate her tomb's location, her exact lineage, whether her son succeeded her peacefully or through quiet coup. Some even claim she never existed, that the Kandake was a title, not a person. But you've walked her city, breathed her dust, felt her humor echo through the walls. You know better. Some truths aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be felt, like warmth lingering in stone after sunset. You find yourself near the pond where lotus flowers still bloom, just as they did in her time. The water mirrors a fading sky, and a breeze ripples across the surface, bending each reflection into another. You kneel, dipping your fingers into the coolness. She's still here, you whisper, though no one is near enough to hear. Maybe that's the point. From the palace comes the sound of flutes, low, uncoordinated, like musicians practicing in secret. The melody rises, falters, then finds itself again. It sounds almost like her laugh, uneven but reassuring. You wander through the city one last time. The air smells of bread, incense, and rain-soaked dust. Lanterns swing outside doorways. A weaver hums softly while rolling up her fabric for night. Two children chase a dog down the alley, their laughter bouncing against the sandstone. It's the kind of scene that would have made the queen smile. Life happening quietly, without ceremony, and yet entirely divine. At the gate, you stop to look back. The palace glows faintly, its outlines blurred by sand and starlight. For a fleeting second, you imagine her standing at the balcony again, tall, serene, the wind tugging at her robe. You almost expect her to speak. But instead, she just looks content, as if she finally knows the world is safe enough to carry on without her. And perhaps it is. The wind shifts, brushing your cheek. Somewhere, far in the dunes, a clay bird hums to itself. Maybe moved by the breeze, maybe by memory. You take a deep breath. The night tastes faintly of honey and dust. The kind of sweetness that belongs only to things that have lasted longer than they should. The stars shimmer harder now, as if in applause. You close your eyes. The story slows, softens. The sounds of Meroe fade into a low, rhythmic pulse, the kind that makes your heartbeat sync with the earth's. You can almost hear her voice again, whispering something you don't quite catch. It doesn't matter. The meaning is in the tone, patient, wry, endlessly kind. The Kandake of Nubia, warrior, diplomat, mother of peace, has slipped quietly into myth, but not absence. Every gust of Nile wind carries her name. Every laugh shared between rivals echoes her wit. Every quiet act of grace repeats her rule. History doesn't forget her. It just lets her rest. And so should you. Now the story fades, the edges blurring like ink on wet papyrus. You lie back in the stillness of your room, the rhythm of your breath matching the Nile's slow tide. Outside your window, the world is quieted. The hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the far-off bark of a dog. All of it folds into one soft sound. Imagine the desert now, pale under moonlight. The pyramids stand small but proud, their shadows long, their silence kind. Somewhere, the breeze brushes past the tombs and whispers through the reeds. The clay bird sings again, faint content, eternal. You picture her walking through that wind, bare feet pressing into cool sand, her golden bracelets chiming like distant bells. She doesn't look back this time. She doesn't need to. The kingdom runs itself now, built on patience and laughter. The river keeps flowing. The stars keep returning. Take a deep breath, slow and full. Let it go. The air feels older here, calmer, wiser. You've walked through empires tonight. You've seen peace born from pride and humor outlast power. You've listened to the hum of history until it began to sound like your own pulse. Now let it all drift. Let your thoughts become grains of sand, sliding quietly into place. Nothing more needs doing. Nothing more needs saying. The night watches gently. The wind remembers for you. Good night.